Victor Leone thought he'd seen every nightmare the criminal underworld could conjure. But nothing. Not the blood, not the betrayals, not the bullets that nearly ended him, prepared him for the sight of his ex-wife standing on that crosswalk, visibly pregnant with a child she never told him existed. In that split second, the most dangerous man in the city became the most powerless. This is the story of a kingpin who ruled an empire but lost the one battle that mattered, and the woman who walked away carrying his greatest secret. If you want to know whether love can survive lies, whether redemption is real, or whether a monster can become a man, stay until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The black Aston Martin idled at the intersection like a predator catching its breath between kills. Victor Leone sat behind the wheel, one hand draped casually over the steering column, the other adjusting the platinum cufflink at his wrist. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual afternoon chaos. Delivery trucks honking, pedestrians weaving between traffic, street vendors calling out their wares. Victor barely registered any of it. His mind was already 3 moves ahead, calculating the variables of tonight's negotiation with the Bratva delegation, running through contingencies, identifying weaknesses. The light turned green. Victor's foot moved toward the accelerator. Then he saw her. The world didn't slow down. It stopped entirely, as if someone had yanked the emergency brake on reality itself. His hand froze. His breath caught somewhere between his lungs and throat. Every carefully constructed wall he'd built over the past 6 months crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. Lena. She stood at the crosswalk, waiting with a small cluster of pedestrians for the signal to change. Her dark hair was longer now, falling past her shoulders in waves he used to thread his fingers through during the quiet hours before dawn. She wore a simple navy dress, practical flats, a canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder. Nothing about her screamed for attention. She looked like 1,000 other women in the city, anonymous and ordinary. Except she wasn't. And she was pregnant. The evidence was unmistakable. The gentle swell of her belly pressing against the fabric of her dress, the protective way her hand rested there almost unconsciously, the slight adjustment in how she stood to accommodate the new weight she carried. Victor's trained eye cataloged the details with clinical precision even as his mind reeled. 5 months, maybe 6. Enough that there was no mistaking it, no room for doubt. The horn blared behind him, someone's impatience cutting through his paralysis. Victor didn't move. Couldn't move. His hands had gone white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his entire body rigid, as if bracing for impact. She hadn't told him. The thought arrived with such force it nearly doubled him over. 6 months since she'd walked out of his penthouse with nothing but a suitcase and a farewell note that said she couldn't live in his shadow anymore. 6 months of silence, of restraint, of respecting the boundary she'd drawn, even though every instinct screamed at him to drag her back. 6 months of telling himself she was safer without him, that he was doing the right thing by letting her go. And she'd been pregnant, carrying his child, living somewhere in this city, navigating doctor's appointments and morning sickness, and all the terrifying vulnerability of impending motherhood, alone. The pedestrian signal changed. The crowd began to move, Lena among them, her gait slightly altered by the pregnancy but still graceful, still unmistakably her. She was looking down at her phone, thumb scrolling through something, completely unaware that 15 feet away, the man who'd once promised to burn the world down for her was watching her vanish into the flow of humanity on the opposite sidewalk. Victor's foot slammed on the accelerator. The Aston Martin lurched forward, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic to a symphony of horns and shouted curses. He didn't care. Couldn't care. Nothing mattered except the woman disappearing down 3rd Avenue, the ghost of his past suddenly made flesh and blood and impossibly, devastatingly real. He abandoned the car in a loading zone, something he'd never done in his life, breaking pattern, breaking protocol. His driver Marco would circle back for it. Right now, Victor Leone, the man who commanded respect through calculation and control, was operating on pure instinct. His Italian leather shoes hit the pavement hard as he shouldered through the crowd, keeping Lena in his sights. She moved with purpose, clearly heading somewhere specific, her attention still on her phone. She turned down a side street, quieter, lined with small boutiques and coffee shops. Victor closed the distance, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the terrifying unknown of what came next. Lena. His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by months of silence and the shock still reverberating through his system. She stopped mid-step, her entire body going rigid. For a moment she didn't turn around, and Victor saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath, as if gathering strength for a battle she'd hoped never to fight. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was carefully neutral, the same mask he'd watched her perfect during their marriage, the one she wore when dealing with his associates, with the dangerous world that orbited him like debris around a black hole. Victor. Her voice was steady, controlled. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same question. He gestured vaguely in the direction they'd come from, the intersection where his entire existence had capsized. Walking around the city, looking like... He couldn't finish the sentence. Looking pregnant. Looking like everything I didn't know I'd lost until this exact moment. Lena's hand moved protectively to her belly, a gesture so instinctive and maternal it drove a spike of something painful straight through Victor's chest. Looking like what, Victor? Like someone living their life? Like you're carrying my child and never thought to mention it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and accusatory. A couple walked past, giving them curious glances before hurrying on. Lena's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. We should talk, Victor said, softer now, trying to gentle the edge in his voice even as adrenaline and anger and bone-deep confusion warred inside him. Please, not here. She looked at him for a long moment, those dark eyes he'd memorized in 1,000 different lights, now assessing him like he was a stranger. Finally, she nodded toward a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. 20 minutes. That's all you get. The cafe was the kind of place Victor would never normally enter. Cramped tables, mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus covered in whimsical script advertising oat milk lattes and vegan pastries. Lena chose a corner table with sight lines to both the door and the window, a habit she'd picked up during their marriage. Even now, even after leaving him, she moved through the world with the awareness he'd taught her. Victor ordered coffee he wouldn't drink and sat across from her, the small table feeling like an ocean between them. Up close, he could see the changes 6 months had wrought. The gentle softness in her face, the fatigue shadowing her eyes, the way she held herself with a new kind of strength that had nothing to do with him. When were you planning to tell me? He kept his voice level, but the words still came out like an indictment. Lena wrapped both hands around her teacup, the ceramic probably warm against her palms. I wasn't. The admission hit like a physical blow. Victor felt something crack inside his chest, some foundational piece of who he thought he was. You weren't going to tell me I have a child? Had. She met his eyes steadily. Had, Victor, past tense. The divorce is final. We don't have anything anymore except history. That's my baby. The possessive came out before he could stop it, before he could wrap it in something less raw. You're carrying my child, Lena. That doesn't change because you signed papers and walked away. No. Her voice was quiet but firm, the kind of quiet that demanded attention more than shouting ever could. This is my baby. Mine. Because I'm the one who's been dealing with the morning sickness and the exhaustion and the terror of doing this alone. I'm the one who lies awake at night wondering if I'm strong enough, if I can give this child the kind of life it deserves. Me, Victor. Not we, not us. Victor forced himself to breathe, to think past the chaos of emotions, threatening to overwhelm the discipline he'd spent a lifetime cultivating. Why? Just tell me why you'd hide this from me. Lena looked down at her tea, and for the first time since she'd turned to face him on the street, he saw her armor crack. Because your world is poison, Victor. It's beautiful and seductive and absolutely toxic, and I couldn't... Her voice caught. I couldn't bring a baby into that. I watched what it did to me. How I had to become someone else just to survive being loved by you, and I got out. I chose to get out while I still remembered who I was before you. I never asked you to be anyone but yourself. You didn't have to ask. She finally looked up, and the pain in her eyes was so naked it made him want to reach across the table and pull her into his arms, consequences be damned. Just being with you required it. Every charity gala where I smiled at men I knew had blood on their hands. Every time I pretended not to notice when you came home at 3 in the morning with split knuckles and wouldn't tell me where you'd been. Every moment I spent waiting for the phone call telling me you were dead. You built me a golden cage, Victor, and you were so good to me inside of it that I almost convinced myself it wasn't a cage at all. So you left. The words came out hollow. You left, and you took my child, and you were just going to, what? Disappear? Raise our baby alone rather than give me a chance to what? Lena's laugh was bitter and sad. To change? To walk away from everything you've built? You are the organization, Victor. It's not something you can resign from. It's not a job you can quit. It's who you are, woven into every decision you make, every relationship you have. And I love... She stopped herself, corrected. I loved you enough to accept that, but I won't do that to my child. Victor sat back, the fight draining out of him as her words sank in. She wasn't wrong. He'd built an empire on ruthlessness and control, on being 3 steps ahead of everyone else, on making the hard choices that kept his people alive and his enemies buried. That didn't just stop because a woman he'd married decided she couldn't live with the consequences. Except now there was a child. His child. A person who didn't ask to be born into this complicated mess. Who deserved better than a father who operated in shadows and a mother so afraid of his world she'd chosen poverty and solitude over his protection? Someone's been following you, he said quietly. Lena went very still. What? The way you've been checking over your shoulder since we sat down. The fact that you picked this table. The way you keep looking at the door. Victor leaned forward, lowering his voice. You're scared, Lena. Not of me. You lost that fear a long time ago. You're scared of something else. Someone else. She stared at him, and he watched her decide whether to keep pretending or to acknowledge what they both knew. Finally, she exhaled shakily. 3 weeks ago, I started getting messages. Anonymous. They knew where I lived, where I worked, what doctor I was seeing. Nothing threatening, just observations. Like someone wanted me to know I was being watched. Ice flooded Victor's veins, the kind of cold clarity that came when threat became concrete. Why didn't you call me? Because that's exactly what they wanted. Lena's hands trembled slightly around her cup. The last message said, "Does he know yet?" That's when I realized this wasn't random. Someone from your world found me. Someone who knows about you, about us, about the baby. And calling you would have confirmed I was still connected to you, still a viable target. Victor's mind was already racing through possibilities, cataloging enemies, analyzing vulnerabilities. 3 weeks ago, right around when the Bratva had started making noise about renegotiating territories. Or when the Colombians had lost that shipment and started looking for someone to blame. Or when, I don't know who, Lena said, reading his expression. And I don't want to know. I just want to disappear, Victor. Take my baby and go somewhere you can't follow. Our baby, he corrected automatically. Then, more gently, Lena, running isn't the answer. If someone from my world found you once, they can find you again. Distance won't protect you. And staying won't either. She met his eyes, defiant despite the fear he could see lurking beneath the surface. At least if I run, I'm making my own choices. I'm not handing control back to you. Victor felt something shift in his chest, some fundamental recalibration of how he'd been approaching this entire conversation. She didn't trust him. Not because she thought he'd hurt her, he'd rather die than lay a finger on her, but because she knew he'd protect her the only way he knew how. With overwhelming force, with the full weight of his organization bearing down on the threat until it was eliminated. And she was right to fear that. Because the old Victor, the one who'd ruled through intimidation and absolute control, would have already been making calls, activating networks, putting the city on lockdown until he found whoever dared threaten what was his. But looking at her now, at the woman he'd loved enough to marry and foolish enough to lose, he understood that approach would only drive her further away, would confirm every fear she had about his world, about him, about the impossibility of building anything real on a foundation of violence. "I won't control you," he said quietly. "I won't force anything. But I need you to let me help, Lena. Not because you owe me, not because I have some claim on you or the baby, but because you're in danger and I have resources you don't." "Resources?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean guns, men, the kind of protection that comes with a body count? I mean information, surveillance, the ability to find out who's targeting you and why." Victor kept his voice steady, reasonable. "Let me put some distance between you and whoever's watching. Quiet protection. You won't even know it's there." "I'll know," Lena said softly. "I'll always know, Victor. That's the problem. Even when I can't see the guards or the cameras or the men in dark cars following me home, I'll know they're there. I'll know you're there, puppeting strings I can't see, making decisions about my safety without asking me. Then I'm asking now." He reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he rested his hand next to hers, not touching but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Let me help. We'll do this your way. Full transparency. You make the calls. I provide the resources." Lena looked down at their almost touching hands, and Victor saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "Why does this matter so much to you? You could walk away right now. Pretend you never saw me on that crosswalk. Go back to your empire and your power plays and your perfectly controlled existence." "Because that baby is mine," Victor said, and something in his voice made her eyes snap up to his face. "And because 6 months ago, you walked out of my life and took the only good thing I'd ever built with you. I let you go because I thought it was what you needed, but I won't let someone hurt you. I can't, Lena. Don't ask me to be that selfless." The air between them felt charged, electric with all the history and hurt and desperate, complicated love that had defined their relationship. Lena's hand moved just slightly, her pinky finger brushing against his. The contact was feather-light, barely there, but Victor felt it like a brand. "One condition," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You stay out of my life. Whoever you put on this, they watch from a distance. They report to you and you report to me. But you don't show up at my apartment. You don't insert yourself into my decisions. You don't try to build a cage around me again, no matter how worried you are." It physically hurt to nod, to accept that boundary when every instinct screamed at him to pull her close and never let go. But Victor had built a career on discipline, on making the hard choice when emotions demanded otherwise. "Agreed." Lena studied his face for a long moment, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the control he'd promised to relinquish. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she pulled her hand back and wrapped it around her teacup again. "I work at a nonprofit now," she said quietly. "Community outreach for women escaping domestic violence. I help them find housing, navigate legal aid, build new lives away from the men who hurt them." She paused, the irony hanging heavy between them. "I'm good at it, because I understand what it takes to walk away from someone you love when staying means losing yourself." Victor absorbed that like a knife to the gut. "I never hurt you." "Not physically." Lena's eyes were sad but clear. "But there are a lot of ways to hurt someone, Victor. A lot of ways to make them feel small and trapped and desperate even when you think you're protecting them." He wanted to argue, to defend himself against the accusation. But sitting there in that tiny cafe, watching the woman he'd married carry his child with a strength born from walking away from him, Victor had to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. She was right. He'd loved her the only way he knew how, with possession, with control, with the absolute certainty that his way was the safest way. And in doing so, he'd made her feel exactly as trapped as any of the women she now helped escape. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it, "for making you feel that way, for not seeing it while we were together." Lena's expression softened slightly, some of the defensive armor slipping. "I know you thought you were protecting me. I know everything you did came from a place of love. But Victor," she placed her hand on her belly, that protective maternal gesture that was already second nature. "This baby deserves parents who can love without cages, who can keep it safe without teaching it that control equals care." "Then teach me," Victor said quietly. "Show me how to be different. I can't promise I'll get it right the first time, or the 10th. But I want to try, Lena. Not because I want you back, though God knows I do, but because you're right. Our child deserves better than what I know how to give. Surprise flickered across Lena's face, quickly suppressed. In all their years together, Victor had never admitted inadequacy, never confessed to not knowing the answer. It went against every principle he'd built his life on. Show no weakness, admit no uncertainty, control the narrative before it controlled you. But parenthood was a narrative he couldn't control, and the woman sitting across from him had already proven she'd walk away rather than let him try. I don't know if you can change, Lena said honestly. I don't know if anyone can, really. We are who we are, shaped by our choices and our scars. Then I'll make different choices. Victor's voice was steady, certain. Starting now. Starting with keeping my distance while I find out who's threatening you. And after that, he paused, choosing his words carefully. After that, we figure out what comes next, together. As two people who share a child, if nothing else. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup in slow, thoughtful circles. Outside, the afternoon light was starting to shift toward evening, painting the cafe in warm, golden tones that made her look softer, younger, like the woman he'd fallen in love with before the weight of his world had settled on her shoulders. Okay, she said finally, but if I find out you've lied to me, if you've gone around my back or made decisions without telling me, I disappear. And this time, Victor, you won't find me. I've gotten very good at helping people vanish. It was a threat and a promise and a boundary all at once. Victor nodded slowly, accepting the terms even as part of him rebelled against the idea of her slipping through his fingers again. Fair enough. He pulled out his phone, opened a new contact. Your number, and before you argue, it's practical. If someone's watching you, I need to be able to reach you quickly. Lena hesitated, then rattled off the digits. Victor saved them, then did something he'd never done in his life. He handed her his phone. Put yourself in my emergency contacts. Mark it as L Medical. Anyone who sees it will think you're my physician. Understanding flickered in her eyes. She took the phone, fingers flying over the screen with practiced ease. When she handed it back, he saw she'd listed herself exactly as instructed. No name, no identification that would connect her to him beyond a professional medical relationship. I have a doctor's appointment Thursday, Lena said quietly. Ultrasound. They'll tell me if it's a boy or girl. She paused, vulnerability cracking through her careful composure. Do you want to know? Victor's throat went tight. Yes. Okay. She gathered her bag, preparing to leave. I'll text you after. Just the information, nothing else. It wasn't an invitation to the appointment. Wasn't an offer to be there, to see their child moving on that grainy screen, to hear the heartbeat that proved something good could come from the wreckage of their marriage. But it was something, a small opening in the wall she'd built between them. Victor stood when she did, instinct and training making him want to walk her out, to see her safely to wherever she was going next. But he caught himself, remembered the boundary she'd drawn, distance, resources without presence. Lena, he said as she turned to leave. She looked back, one hand on her belly, waiting. Thank you for telling me. Even if you didn't plan to, even if I had to find out by accident, thank you for not lying when I asked. Something complicated moved across her face. Pain and regret and a shadow of the love that had once bound them together. I was never good at lying to you, Victor. That was always the problem. Then she was gone, slipping out of the cafe and into the flow of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Victor watched through the window until she disappeared around a corner, his mind already cataloging everything he needed to do. Calls to make, people to activate, a threat to neutralize before it got anywhere near the woman carrying his child. But first, he pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Marco. Need a complete workup. Anonymous surveillance, targeting a civilian. Recent activity, 3 weeks back. Pull security footage from every camera within 5 blocks of 3rd and Madison. I want faces. The response came back immediately. On it, boss. Anything else? Victor looked down at the contact information glowing on his screen. L Medical. Such a small thing. 2 words that meant nothing to anyone else but represented a seismic shift in his carefully controlled world. Yes, he typed back. Put together a security detail. Quiet surveillance only. Subject is to have no idea they're being protected. Anyone who makes contact, I want to know about it immediately. Understood. The civilian from earlier? Victor hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. In his world, information was currency and knowledge was power. The fewer people who knew about Lena, about the baby, the safer they'd be. But he also knew Marco could be trusted with his life. Had been, more than once. Yes. And Marco, this stays between us. No one else in the organization hears about this. No one. You got it, boss. Ghost protocol. Victor pocketed his phone and left the cafe, stepping back into the city that had been his kingdom for over a decade. But as he walked back toward where he'd abandoned his car, now predictably ticketed and probably photographed by a dozen traffic cameras, he felt different. Off balance in a way that had nothing to do with the tactical situation and everything to do with the woman who'd just walked away from him for the second time. The first time she'd left, he'd let her go because he thought it was what she needed. He'd told himself he was being noble, giving her the freedom she'd asked for, even though it felt like carving out his own heart. Now he understood he'd been lying to himself. He'd let her go because he didn't know how to hold on to her without breaking her, because his only language was control and possession, and she'd needed something he didn't know how to speak. But things were different now. There was a child involved, his child, and someone out there who knew about it, who was watching Lena closely enough to catalog her movements, her patterns, her vulnerabilities. Someone who'd reached out just to let her know they could reach her. That changed everything. Victor slid into the driver's seat of his Aston Martin, peeling the parking ticket off the windshield and tossing it into the passenger seat. As he pulled into traffic, his mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and probabilities, identifying potential threats and neutralizing them before they could fully form. But underneath the tactical planning, beneath the cold logic he'd honed over years of survival in a world that rewarded ruthlessness and punished hesitation, something else stirred, something that felt dangerously close to fear. Because for the first time in his adult life, Victor Leone had something to lose that he couldn't protect through violence or intimidation. He had a woman who'd already proven she'd rather face danger alone than accept his help. He had an unborn child who didn't know him, who might never know him if Lena made good on her threat to disappear. And he had an enemy in the shadows who understood exactly where to strike to hurt him most. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. Victor glanced at the screen, expecting an update from Marco. Instead, he saw an unknown number, the message simple and chilling. Congratulations on the baby. Such wonderful news. Would be terrible if something happened to them both. Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenching as rage flooded through him, hot and vicious and barely controlled. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen him with Lena at the cafe, had put the pieces together, and was now making their intentions clear. This wasn't reconnaissance. It was a declaration of war. He forwarded the message to Marco with a single instruction. Trace this, now. Then he did something he'd sworn he wouldn't do. He called Lena. She answered on the 3rd ring, wariness evident in her voice. Victor? Where are you right now? He kept his voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Walking home. Why? What's wrong? Don't go home. Not yet. Victor was already calculating routes, checking mirrors, making sure he wasn't being followed. I'm sending a car. It'll be there in 3 minutes. Black sedan. Driver's name is Marcus. He'll take you somewhere safe. Victor, what the hell is going on? Fear crept into her voice now, the same fear he'd seen in her eyes at the cafe. I got a message. About you. About the baby. He paused, weighing how much to tell her, how much honesty she could handle. Whoever's been watching you just confirmed they know we met today, and they're threatening you, Lena, both of you. He heard her breath catch, heard the sound of her footsteps quickening. I'm at 5th and Market. There's a pharmacy. Stay inside, around people. Marcus will come in and get you. He's 6'2", dark hair, wearing a gray suit. He'll say the password is sanctuary. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Lena said, but he could hear her moving, hear the ding of the pharmacy door as she entered. This is your world bleeding into mine, Victor. This is what happens when we can argue about whose fault this is later, Victor cut in, his voice sharp with urgency. Right now I need you to trust me, just for the next hour. Can you do that? Silence stretched between them, broken only by the ambient noise of the pharmacy in the background. Finally, Lena spoke, her voice small and tired. I don't have much choice, do I? No, Victor admitted. You don't. But Lena, I promise I'll keep you safe, whatever it takes. That's what I'm afraid of, she whispered. Then the line went dead. Victor immediately called Marcus, one of his most trusted operatives, former Secret Service, unflappable, discreet. You're picking up a pregnant woman at 5th and Market, pharmacy on the northeast corner. Password is Sanctuary. Take her to the safe house in Morningside. No one follows you, no one knows where she is, and Marcus, she's scared. So you're gentle, you're professional, and you don't tell her anything except that she's safe. Understood, boss. ETA 2 minutes. Victor ended the call and focused on driving, his mind racing through scenarios and countermeasures. Whoever had sent that message wanted him to know they could reach Lena, wanted him afraid, reactive, making mistakes born from emotion rather than strategy. They'd succeeded on the fear. Victor could admit that much. The thought of someone hurting Lena, hurting their child, filled him with a primal terror he'd never experienced in all his years navigating the criminal underworld, but they'd miscalculated on the rest. Because Victor Leone hadn't built an empire by being reactive. He'd built it by being patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless when the situation demanded it. And this situation, protecting the mother of his child from an enemy brazen enough to threaten her directly, demanded every ounce of ruthlessness he possessed. His phone rang. Marco. Talk to me. Message came from a burner, bounced through 3 different cell towers before going dead. Whoever sent it knows what they're doing. Find them anyway. Victor's voice was cold, flat. The voice he used when giving orders he expected to be followed without question. Pull traffic cameras, ATM footage, security feeds from every business within a 6-block radius of that cafe. Someone was watching us. I want their face. On it. But boss, if they're this sophisticated, there's a chance they're already in the wind, burned the phone, ditched the surveillance position, went to ground. Then we dig them out. Victor turned onto his street, the gleaming high-rise that housed his penthouse coming into view. And Marco, this doesn't stop until I know who's behind this, and they're no longer a threat. Whatever resources you need, you have them. Understood. I'll have a preliminary report in 2 hours. Victor ended the call and pulled into his building's underground garage, nodding to the security guard as the gate lifted. His phone buzzed again. Marcus this time. Package secure, en route to location. ETA 20 minutes. Relief washed through him, temporary but powerful. Lena was safe. For now, she was protected, hidden away from whoever was targeting her. It bought him time to think, to plan, to dismantle this threat piece by piece until nothing remained but the memory of someone foolish enough to come after what belonged to him. Except she didn't belong to him. Not anymore. Lena had made that abundantly clear, in her words, in her actions, in the way she'd built a life that had nothing to do with him or his power or his protection, but their child did. That baby growing inside her, innocent and unaware of the dangerous world it was being born into, that was his. His blood, his responsibility, his to protect with every resource at his disposal. And if keeping that child safe meant confronting the parts of himself Lena had walked away from, if it meant becoming the monster she feared in order to eliminate the monsters hunting her, then so be it. Victor took the private elevator to his penthouse, the ascent smooth and silent. When the doors opened, he stepped into the space that had once held Lena's laughter and warmth, and now felt cavernous and cold despite the expensive furnishings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, 18-year-old single malt he'd been saving for a special occasion, and stood at the window, looking out over the glittering expanse of the city he'd claimed as his own through blood and cunning and sheer force of will. Somewhere out there, an enemy was celebrating their move, thinking they'd backed him into a corner, thinking fear would make him sloppy, would compromise his judgment, would turn the legendary Victor Leone into just another desperate man making mistakes. They were wrong. Fear didn't make him sloppy. It made him dangerous in ways they couldn't possibly understand. His phone lit up with an incoming text from an unknown number. Victor's jaw tightened as he opened it, expecting another threat, another taunt from whoever was orchestrating this. Instead, He saw a single image, an ultrasound photo, grainy and black and white, showing the unmistakable curve of a tiny spine, the small round shape of a head, delicate limbs curled in that universal fetal position. Below it, 3 words. It's a girl. Victor's breath left him in a rush. He sank down onto the leather sofa, the scotch forgotten in his hand as he stared at the photo. His daughter. He was going to have a daughter. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Lena. I'm safe. Marcus was professional. But Victor, we need to talk about what happens next. This can't be the new normal. He typed back carefully, aware that every word mattered, that this conversation could determine whether she let him in or shut him out completely. I know. Give me 24 hours to identify the threat, then we talk. About everything. The response took longer this time. Victor watched the 3 dots appear and disappear, as Lena composed and deleted messages he'd never see. Finally, 24 hours. Not a minute more. Fair enough. He had a day to find whoever was targeting the mother of his child. A day to prove to Lena that he could protect her without smothering her, could keep her safe without building another cage. A day to figure out how to be the kind of father a little girl deserved, one who could navigate her safely through a dangerous world without teaching her that love and control were the same thing. Victor set down his scotch and pulled up the ultrasound photo again, studying the tiny figure that would become his daughter. She looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile. The thought of anyone threatening her, of anyone causing her harm, filled him with a rage so pure and focused it was almost clarifying. He'd built an empire on calculated violence and strategic intimidation. He'd eliminated enemies and consolidated power and made the hard choices that kept his organization running smoothly in a world where weakness meant death. But looking at that ultrasound, at the evidence of a life he'd helped create with the only woman he'd ever loved, Victor understood that everything he'd done before was preparation for this moment, for the war that was coming, for the reckoning he'd bring down on anyone foolish enough to threaten his family, and for the impossible task of learning to love without cages, to protect without controlling, to be present without overwhelming before Lena disappeared again, this time taking his daughter with her. The city glittered below him, beautiful and treacherous and full of hidden dangers. Victor finished his scotch in one burning swallow and made a silent promise to the tiny figure in that ultrasound photo. Whatever it took, whoever he had to become, he would keep her safe. He would keep them both safe. Even if it meant finally confronting the truth Lena had tried to tell him 6 months ago, that sometimes the greatest threat didn't come from outside. Sometimes it came from the very protection meant to keep you secure. Viet. Lai voi hook. Hap. Dan hon kikten. Hon teen 38. Yeo. Hook. Victor Leone's hands were still steady on the steering wheel when he saw her. They'd been steady through ambushes, executions, and wars that left bodies in their wake. But the moment his ex-wife stepped onto that crosswalk, 6 months pregnant with a child she'd hidden from him, those hands began to shake. The most feared man in the city had just discovered he was about to become a father, and the woman carrying his daughter had planned to disappear forever without telling him she existed. This isn't a love story. It's a reckoning. It's what happens when a man who controls everything loses control of the one thing that matters. When the woman who escaped his world gets dragged back into it by an enemy who knows exactly how to destroy them both. When a kingpin realizes that all the power in the world means nothing if he can't protect the 2 people he'd die for. Stay until the end to find out if a monster can become a father, if love can survive in a world built on violence, if redemption is real or just another beautiful lie we tell ourselves. And when you're done, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Because this story about secrets, second chances, and the price of power deserves to travel far. Part 1. The moment that stops. Time. The black Aston Martin idled at the intersection like a coiled serpent, engine purring with barely restrained power. Victor Leone sat behind the wheel, his left hand draped casually over the steering column, his right adjusting the platinum cufflink at his wrist with the unconscious precision of a man who'd turned self-control into an art form. The city sprawled around him in its usual afternoon chaos. Delivery trucks blocking lanes, taxis honking in aggressive harmony, pedestrians flooding the crosswalks in waves of humanity that cared nothing for the luxury vehicle in their midst. Victor registered none of it. His mind had already moved past this moment, past this intersection, past the mundane reality of traffic lights and impatient commuters. He was calculating angles for tonight's meeting with the Bratva delegation, running probability matrices on how Dmitri would respond to the territorial proposal, identifying leverage points and pressure zones in a negotiation that would reshape the city's criminal landscape for the next decade. The light turned green. His foot shifted toward the accelerator, muscle memory preparing to launch the Aston Martin forward with the smooth acceleration that made German engineering worth its astronomical price tag. Then the world detonated. Not with sound or fire or any physical explosion, but with the kind of soul-deep concussive force that comes when reality fractures and reforms into something unrecognizable. Victor's entire body locked, every muscle going rigid as if he'd been struck by lightning. His hand froze on the cufflink. His breath stopped somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The careful calculations running through his mind scattered like birds startled by gunfire. Because there, in the middle of the crosswalk, surrounded by strangers and completely unaware she was being watched, was Lena. His Lena, his ex-wife. The woman who'd walked out of his penthouse 6 months ago with nothing but a suitcase and a handwritten note that said she couldn't breathe in his shadow anymore. The woman he'd loved with a ferocity that terrified him and had let go because she'd asked him to. Because for once in his ruthless life, he'd chosen her happiness over his own desperate need. She looked different. Her dark hair was longer, falling past her shoulders in loose waves instead of the sleek updo she'd favored during their marriage. She wore a simple navy blue dress, something modest and unremarkable that would have been unthinkable in the days when he draped her in designer labels and custom couture. Practical flats instead of heels. A canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder, the kind you picked up at a farmer's market or bookstore. She looked ordinary, anonymous, like she'd deliberately erased every trace of the life they'd shared. Except for one thing. She was pregnant. The evidence was unmistakable. The gentle swell of her belly pressing against the cotton fabric of her dress, the protective way her hand rested there with unconscious tenderness, the subtle shift in her posture that spoke of weight distribution and accommodation. Victor's brain, trained through years of survival to catalog details in microseconds, processed the information with brutal efficiency, 5 months along, maybe 6. Healthy from what he could see. Glowing, even, in that way people talked about with pregnant women. And he'd known nothing about it. The horn blared behind him, some impatient driver's fury cutting through his paralysis like a blade. Victor didn't move. Couldn't move. His knuckles had gone white where they gripped the steering wheel. His entire frame locked in a kind of shocked rigidity he hadn't experienced since he was a child, since before he'd learned to armor himself against surprise and vulnerability and anything that could be used as a weapon against him. She hadn't told him. The thought arrived with the force of a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and sending his pulse into a chaotic rhythm that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with devastation. 6 months. She'd been gone for 6 months, and somewhere in that time, early on, probably, maybe even before she'd left, she'd gotten pregnant. With his child. Had to be his child, because Lena wasn't the kind of woman who moved on quickly, who sought comfort in someone else's arms before the sheets were cold. 6 months of silence. 6 months of him respecting the boundary she'd drawn, restraining every instinct that screamed at him to find her, to bring her home, to fix whatever had broken between them with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to every other problem in his life. 6 months of telling himself he was doing the noble thing, the right thing, letting her go even though it felt like carving out his own heart with a dull knife. And all that time, she'd been pregnant, carrying his child, navigating morning sickness and doctor's appointments and the terrifying vulnerability of impending motherhood, alone. The pedestrian signal changed. The crowd began to move, a river of humanity flowing across the intersection and carrying Lena with it. She was looking down at her phone, her thumb scrolling through something with casual distraction, completely unaware that 15 feet away, the man who'd promised to burn the world down for her was watching his entire existence crack open and reform around this single, devastating revelation. She reached the opposite sidewalk and kept walking, her gait slightly altered by the pregnancy but still graceful, still unmistakably her. Victor watched her blend into the afternoon foot traffic, watched her become just another anonymous figure in a city of millions, watched her start to disappear the way she'd clearly intended to disappear permanently, with his child, with his daughter or son, with the future he didn't know he was losing until this exact moment. Something inside him snapped. Victor's foot slammed the accelerator, and the Aston Martin leaped forward like a predator finally released from its chain. He cut across 2 lanes of traffic to a symphony of screeching brakes and furious horns, nearly clipping a taxi whose driver leaned out the window screaming curses in 3 languages. Victor heard none of it, saw none of it. His entire being had narrowed to a single point of focus, the woman in the navy dress disappearing down 3rd Avenue. He abandoned the car in a loading zone, something he'd never done in 15 years of owning vehicles worth more than most people's houses. Left it running, door open, keys in the ignition. His driver Marco would circle back, would handle it, would understand that something catastrophic had happened because Victor Leone didn't break pattern, didn't abandon protocol, didn't let anything shatter the iron control he maintained over every aspect of his existence. Until now. His Italian leather shoes hit the pavement hard, each step deliberate and driven as he shouldered through the crowd. People scattered instinctively, some animal part of their brain recognizing predator even dressed in a $3,000 suit. Victor kept Lena in his sights, closing the distance between them with the focused intensity of a man who'd just seen his past and future collide in the middle of a crosswalk. She turned down a side street, quieter, lined with boutique shops and independent coffee houses, the kind of neighborhood that catered to artists and young professionals and people who thought they were safe from men like him. Victor's heart was hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the adrenaline flooding his system, the fight-or-flight response his body hadn't triggered in years because nothing scared him anymore. Except this. Except her. Except the possibility that she'd look at him and confirm every fear crystallizing in his gut, that she'd planned this, that she'd intended to raise his child alone, that she'd chosen poverty and solitude and the constant low-grade danger of being unprotected over accepting anything from him. Lena. His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw by shock and 6 months of enforced silence. She stopped mid-step as if he'd yanked an invisible cord. For a long moment she didn't turn around, and Victor watched her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath, watched her steel herself for a confrontation she'd clearly hoped to avoid forever. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was carefully blank, that perfect neutral mask she'd perfected during their marriage, the one she wore when his associates came for dinner, when violence leaked into their home despite his best efforts to keep it contained, when she had to pretend that loving him wasn't slowly killing her. Victor. Her voice was steady, controlled, giving away nothing. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same question. The words came out sharp, edged with accusation he couldn't quite suppress. He gestured vaguely back toward the intersection, toward the moment that had detonated his carefully reconstructed life. Walking around the city like... He couldn't finish. Like you're not carrying my child. Like you weren't planning to disappear forever. Like the last 6 months meant nothing. Lena's hand moved to her belly in that instinctive protective gesture, and Victor felt something crack inside his chest. She was shielding the baby. From him, from the father who didn't even know he had a child on the way. Like someone living their life, she finished for him, her tone deliberately even. Because that's what I'm doing, Victor. Living, moving forward, building something new. Without telling me, I'm going to be a father. The accusation hung between them, heavy with betrayal and hurt, and a rage so profound it made his hand shake. A couple walked past, their conversation dying as they registered the tension crackling in the air. They hurried on, instinctively avoiding whatever domestic drama was playing out on this quiet side street. Lena's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. We need to talk, Victor said, forcing himself to gentle his tone, even as everything inside him screamed for answers, for explanations, for some kind of logic that would make this betrayal make sense. Not here. Not like this. She stared at him for a long moment, those dark eyes he'd memorized in 1,000 different lights, now assessing him like he was a stranger. A threat. Someone to be managed rather than loved. Finally, she nodded toward a small cafe tucked between a vintage bookstore and a boutique selling overpriced artisanal goods. 20 minutes, that's all you get. It was an insult and a boundary and a concession all at once. Victor swallowed the fury rising in his throat and nodded. 20 minutes. He'd toppled rival organizations in less time. Surely he could get answers about his own child in 20 minutes. Except nothing about this situation followed the rules of his world, and the woman walking toward that cafe wasn't someone he could intimidate or negotiate with or bend to his will through sheer force of personality. She was Lena, the only person who'd ever walked away from him and lived to tell about it, and she'd done it while pregnant with his child. The cafe was aggressively quirky, exposed brick walls covered in local art, mismatched furniture that looked salvaged from estate sales, a chalkboard menu advertising things like turmeric golden milk lattes and adaptogenic mushroom elixirs. It was the kind of place Victor would normally dismiss with a glance, the kind of studied authenticity that catered to people who thought buying organic made them better than everyone else. But Lena fit here. She looked comfortable as she chose a corner table with clear sight lines to both the door and the street-facing windows, a habit she'd picked up from him, a survival instinct he'd taught her during their marriage. Even now, even after leaving, she moved through the world with the awareness he'd drilled into her. Some lessons, apparently, you didn't forget. Victor ordered an espresso he had no intention of drinking and sat across from her, the small, reclaimed wood table feeling like an ocean between them. This close, he could see the changes 6 months had wrought, the softness in her face that came with pregnancy, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion and stress, the way she held herself with a new kind of strength that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with survival. She'd gotten harder, more isolated, more guarded. He'd done that to her, and she'd chosen to carry that damage into a new life rather than give him a chance to fix it. When were you planning to tell me? He kept his voice level, but the question still came out like an indictment. Or were you just going to disappear? Raise my child somewhere I'd never find you? Lena wrapped both hands around her teacup, some herbal thing that smelled like flowers and earth. I wasn't planning to tell you at all. The admission hit like a bullet to the chest. Victor felt his carefully maintained composure crack, felt rage and hurt, and something dangerously close to grief surged through him. You weren't going to tell me I have a child? Had, she corrected, her voice quiet but firm. Had, Victor. Past tense, the divorce is final. The papers are signed. We don't have anything anymore except history and mistakes, and a marriage that nearly destroyed me. That's my baby. The possessive came out raw and unfiltered, every syllable carrying the weight of 6 months' silence and the devastating revelation that had shattered it. My child, Lena. That doesn't change because you decided you were done with me. No. She met his eyes, and he saw steel in her gaze that hadn't been there during their marriage. This is my baby, mine, because I'm the one who's been dealing with it, the nausea that had me throwing up 3 times a day for 2 months. The exhaustion so profound I could barely function. The terror of doing this alone, of wondering if I'm strong enough, if I can give this child the life it deserves without its father's blood money and violence. The words were meant to wound, and they succeeded. Victor forced himself to breathe, to think past the chaos of emotions threatening to overwhelm the discipline he'd spent a lifetime perfecting. Why? Just tell me why you'd hide something like this from me. Lena looked down at her tea, and for the first time since she'd turned around on that street, he saw her armor crack, saw vulnerability leak through the careful control. Because your world is poison, Victor. Her voice wavered slightly. It's beautiful and seductive and luxurious and absolutely irreversibly toxic, and I couldn't... She stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't bring a baby into that. I watched what it did to me. How I had to become someone else just to survive being loved by you. How I learned to smile at men with blood on their hands and pretend I didn't know what happened in the basement of that warehouse you thought I didn't know about. How I perfected the art of not asking questions because the answers would confirm every nightmare I was already living. Victor's jaw clenched. I never asked you to be anyone but yourself. You didn't have to ask. The pain in her eyes was so naked it made his chest ache. Just being with you required it. Every charity gala where I made small talk with monsters in tuxedos. Every time I pretended not to notice when you came home at 3 a.m. with blood on your shirt you thought you'd hidden well enough. Every moment I spent waiting for the phone call telling me you were dead, that someone finally got smart enough or fast enough or ruthless enough to end you. You built me a beautiful cage, Victor. Penthouse views and designer clothes and anything I wanted except the one thing that mattered, freedom. And you were so good to me inside that cage that I almost convinced myself it wasn't a cage at all. So you left. The words came out hollow, scraped clean of emotion. You walked out, and you took my child with you. I saved my child, Lena corrected, her voice stronger now. I saved both of us from a life where love and danger are so tangled together you can't tell where one ends and the other begins, where protection looks like control and care looks like possession, and I'd have to teach my son or daughter that this is what love is supposed to feel like. Victor sat back, the fight draining out of him as her words landed like body blows. She wasn't wrong. He had built a cage, even if he'd gilded it and convinced himself it was a palace. He had controlled her, even while telling himself it was protection. He had loved her the only way he knew how, with absolute possession and zero tolerance for threat. And she'd nearly suffocated under the weight of it. Someone's been following you, he said quietly, changing tactics because this conversation was going nowhere except deeper into the wounds they'd inflicted on each other. Lena went very still. What are you talking about? The way you've been checking over your shoulder since we sat down. How you picked this specific table. The fact that you keep glancing at the door like you're expecting someone. Victor leaned forward, lowering his voice. You're scared, Lena. And not of me. You lost that fear a long time ago, probably around the time you decided to walk away. You're scared of something else. Someone else. He watched her decide whether to keep pretending or acknowledge what they both knew. The cafe hummed with ambient noise, the hiss of the espresso machine, low conversations, indie music playing through overhead speakers. Finally, she exhaled shakily, her shoulders dropping slightly as the defensive posture cracked. 3 weeks ago, I started getting messages, she admitted quietly. Anonymous. They knew where I lived, where I worked, what prenatal clinic I was using, what days I had appointments. Nothing threatening directly, just observations, facts. Like someone wanted me to know they were watching, that they could reach me whenever they wanted. Ice flooded Victor's veins, the kind of cold clarity that came when threat crystallized from abstract to concrete. His mind immediately began running scenarios, cataloging enemies, analyzing vulnerabilities. Why didn't you call me? Because that's exactly what they wanted. Lena's hands trembled slightly around her cup. The last message came 2 days ago. It said, "Does he know yet?" That's when I realized this wasn't random. Someone from your world found me. Someone who knows about you, about us, about the baby. And calling you would have confirmed I was still connected to you. Would have made me an active target instead of just a name in a file somewhere. Victor's mind was already 3 steps ahead, running probability matrices on who would target Lena and why. The Bratva had been making aggressive moves lately, testing boundaries. The Colombians were still furious about that lost shipment, looking for someone to blame and someone to hurt. Or maybe it was someone from the old regime, someone who'd lost power when Victor consolidated control and had been waiting years for the perfect revenge. I don't know who, Lena said, reading his expression with the familiarity of someone who'd spent years learning to decode his silences. And I don't want to know. I just want to take my baby and disappear, Victor. Go somewhere so far off the grid that your world can't find me, can't touch me, can't destroy what I'm trying to build. Our baby, he corrected automatically. Then more gently, because he could see how close to breaking she was, Lena, running won't protect you. If someone from my world found you once, they can find you again. Distance isn't safety, it's just a delay. And staying definitely isn't safety, she shot back. At least if I run, I'm making my own choices. I'm not handing control back to you so you can lock me in an even more beautiful cage and tell yourself it's for my own good. Victor felt something fundamental shift in his chest, some recalibration of approach and strategy. She didn't trust him. Not because she thought he'd hurt her physically, he'd rather die than lay a hand on her in anger, but because she knew exactly how he'd protect her. With overwhelming force, with the full weight of his organization bearing down on the threat until it was eliminated, regardless of collateral damage or what she wanted. And she was right to fear that, because every instinct in his body screamed at him to do exactly that, to mobilize his entire network, to put the city on lockdown, to find whoever dared threaten what was his, and erase them so completely their own mothers wouldn't recognize the remains. But that approach would only confirm every fear she had, would prove that he hadn't changed, that he couldn't change, that the monster she'd fled was still there beneath the expensive suits and careful words. "I won't control you," Victor said quietly, each word carefully chosen. "I won't force anything. But I need you to let me help. Not because you owe me. Not because I have some claim on you. But because you're in danger, Lena. Real danger. And I have resources you don't." "Resources," she repeated, and bitter humor crept into her voice. "You mean guns, soldiers, the kind of protection that comes with a body count and collateral damage and all the things I left you to escape." "I mean information," Victor countered. "Surveillance, intelligence networks. The ability to find out who's targeting you and why before they make their move." He paused, letting that sink in. "I can put distance between you and whoever's watching. Quiet protection. You won't even know it's there." "I'll know," Lena said softly. "I'll always know, Victor." That's the problem. Even when I can't see the guards or the cameras or the men following me at a distance, I'll know they're there. I'll know you're there, pulling strings, making decisions about my safety without asking what I want. Then I'm asking now. Victor reached across the table slowly, deliberately, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he rested his hand next to hers, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin, but not touching, not claiming. "Let me help. We'll do this your way. Full transparency. You make the decisions. I provide the resources and the muscle, but you're in control." Lena stared at their almost touching hands, and Victor saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "Why does this matter so much to you? You could walk away right now. Pretend you never saw me at that intersection. Go back to your empire and your negotiations and your perfectly controlled existence where everything follows the rules you set." "Because that baby is mine," Victor said, and something in his voice made her eyes snap up to his face. "And because 6 months ago, you walked out of my life and took the only good thing I'd ever built with you. I let you go because I thought it was what you needed. Because for the first time in my life, I chose someone else's happiness over my own wants. But I won't let someone hurt you, Lena. I can't. Don't ask me to be that selfless." The air between them felt charged, electric with history and hurt and the desperate, complicated love that had defined and ultimately destroyed their marriage. Lena's hand moved, just slightly, her pinky finger brushing against his. The contact was so light, he might have imagined it, but Victor felt it like a brand. "One condition," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You stay out of my daily life. Whoever you put on this, they watch from a distance. They report to you and you report to me. But you don't show up at my apartment. You don't insert yourself into my decisions. You don't try to build another cage, no matter how worried you are or how much danger you think I'm in." It physically hurt to agree, to accept that boundary when every fiber of his being screamed at him to pull her close and never let go. But Victor had built an empire on discipline, on making the hard choice when emotion demanded otherwise. "Agreed." Lena studied his face with those dark eyes that had always seen too much, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the control he'd promised to relinquish. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she pulled her hand back and wrapped it around her teacup again, creating distance. "I work at a nonprofit now," she said quietly. "Community outreach for women escaping domestic violence. I help them find housing, navigate legal systems, build new lives away from the men who hurt them." She paused, letting the irony settle between them. "I'm good at it, because I understand what it takes to walk away from someone you love, when staying means losing yourself piece by piece until there's nothing left." The words landed like a knife between his ribs. Victor forced himself not to react, not to defend, not to argue that he'd never hurt her the way those men hurt their victims. Because she was right. There were 1,000 ways to hurt someone, 1,000 ways to make them feel trapped and desperate, even while convinced you were protecting them. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally. I know. Lena's expression softened slightly, some of the defensive armor slipping. That's what made it so hard to leave. You thought you were loving me, and maybe you were, in the only way you know how. But Victor, she placed her hand on her belly, that protective gesture that was already instinct. This baby deserves parents who know the difference between love and possession, between protection and control. And I don't know if you can learn that. I don't know if anyone can change that fundamentally. Then let me try, Victor said quietly. Show me what it looks like. I won't get it right the first time. Probably not the 10th, but I want to try, Lena. Not because I want you back, though God knows I do, but because you're right. Our child deserves better than what I know how to give. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly suppressed. In all the years she'd known him, Victor had never admitted inadequacy, never confessed to not having the answer. It violated every principle he'd built his life on. Show no weakness, admit no uncertainty, control the narrative before it controlled you. But parenthood was a narrative he couldn't control. And the woman across from him had already proven she'd rather face danger alone than accept his version of protection. I don't know if people can really change, Lena admitted. We're shaped by our choices and our traumas and the paths we've walked. You are who you are, Victor, and that person built an empire on violence and control. Then I'll make different choices, starting now. His voice was steady, certain. Starting with giving you space while I find out who's threatening you. And after that, we figure out what comes next. Together. As two people who share a child, if nothing else. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup in slow, thoughtful circles. Outside, the afternoon light was shifting toward evening, painting the cafe in warm golden tones that softened the hard edges of their conversation. Okay, she said finally. But if I find out you've lied to me, if you've gone behind my back or made decisions without telling me, I disappear. And this time, Victor, you won't find me. I've gotten very good at helping people vanish. I know every trick, every safe house, every underground network. Push me, and I'll use them. It was a threat and a promise and a boundary all at once. Victor nodded slowly, accepting terms that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Fair enough. He pulled out his phone, opened a new contact. Your number. Lena hesitated, then rattled off the digits. Victor saved them, then did something unprecedented. He handed her his phone. Put yourself in my emergency contacts. List yourself as L Medical. Anyone who sees it will think you're my physician. Understanding flickered in her eyes. She took the phone, fingers moving quickly over the screen. When she handed it back, he saw she'd followed his instructions exactly. No name that would connect her to him. Just a professional designation that would explain why he might need to reach her urgently. I have a doctor's appointment Thursday, Lena said quietly. Ultrasound. They're going to tell me if it's a boy or girl. She paused, vulnerability cracking through her careful composure. Do you want to know? Victor's throat went tight. Yes. Okay, I'll text you after. Just the information, nothing else. It wasn't an invitation to the appointment, wasn't an offer to be there, to see their child on that screen, to hear the heartbeat that proved something good could survive the wreckage of their marriage. But it was something, a small crack in the wall between them. Victor stood when she did, instinct screaming at him to walk her out, to see her safely wherever she was going. But he caught himself, remembered the boundaries she'd drawn. Distance. Resources without presence. Lena, he said as she gathered her bag. She looked back, one hand protectively on her belly. Thank you. For telling me the truth when I asked. Even if you didn't plan to, even if I forced the conversation, thank you for not lying. Something complicated moved across her face, pain and regret and a ghost of the love that had once consumed them both. I was never good at lying to you, Victor. That was always my problem. Then she was gone, slipping out of the cafe and into the flow of pedestrians. Victor watched through the window until she disappeared, his mind already cataloging everything that needed to happen in the next 24 hours. But first, he pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Marco. Need a complete workup. Anonymous surveillance on a civilian target. Recent activity, 3 weeks back. Pull every camera within 10 blocks of 3rd and Madison. I want faces, patterns, anything. The response was immediate. On it. Anything else? Victor looked at the contact information glowing on his screen. L Medical. Such a small thing, but it represented a seismic shift in his carefully controlled world. Yes. Assemble a security detail. Ghost protocol. Subject doesn't know they're being protected. Anyone who makes contact, I want to know immediately. And Marco? This stays between us. No one else in the organization hears about this. No one. Understood, boss. Consider it done. Victor pocketed his phone and left the cafe, stepping back into the city he'd claimed as his kingdom. But as he walked toward where he'd abandoned his car, now sporting multiple tickets and probably a dozen angry photos from other drivers, he felt fundamentally different. Off balance in a way that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with the woman who'd just walked away from him for the second time. The first time he'd let her go because he'd thought it was noble, thought he was respecting her choice even though it felt like self-destruction. Now he understood he'd been lying to himself. He'd let her go because he didn't know how to hold on to her without breaking her, because possession was the only language he spoke, and she'd needed something he didn't know how to give. But things were different now. There was a child, his child, and someone dangerous enough to find Lena despite her precautions, to watch her, to send messages designed to terrorize. That changed everything. Victor slid into his car, peeling tickets off the windshield and tossing them aside. As he pulled into traffic, his phone buzzed with an incoming message from an unknown number. His blood went cold as he read it. Congratulations on the baby. Such wonderful news. Would be terrible if something happened to them both. Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Someone had been watching the cafe, had seen them together, had put the pieces together and was now making their intentions crystal clear. This wasn't reconnaissance. It was a declaration of war. He forwarded the message to Marco. Trace this. Now. I don't care what it costs. Then he broke his promise to Lena and called her. She answered on the third ring. Victor? Where are you right now? His voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. Walking home. Why? What's wrong? Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't go home. Stay where you are. I'm sending a car. 3 minutes. Black sedan, driver named Marcus. Password is sanctuary. He'll take you somewhere safe. Victor, what the hell is going on? Fear bled into her voice. I got a message. About you. About the baby. He paused, weighing honesty against panic. Whoever's been watching you just confirmed they saw us together. And they're making threats, Lena. Direct threats against both of you. He heard her breath catch, heard her footsteps quicken. I'm at 5th and Market. There's a pharmacy on the corner. Go inside, stay visible. Around people. Marcus will come in and get you. Victor was already making calculations, running routes. He's 6'2", dark hair, gray suit. Password is sanctuary. Don't go with anyone else. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Lena said, and he could hear tears threatening beneath the anger. This is your world, Victor. This is what happens when... We can argue about fault later, he cut in. Right now, I need you to trust me. 1 hour. Can you do that? Silence. Then, small and tired, I don't have a choice, do I? No, Victor admitted. But Lena, I promise I'll keep you safe, whatever it takes. That's what I'm afraid of. The line went dead. Victor immediately called Marcus. Pregnant woman, 5th and Market, pharmacy on the northeast corner, password sanctuary. Take her to the Morningside safe house. No tail, no trace, no mistakes. ETA 90 seconds. Victor ended the call and focused on driving, his mind running through scenarios and countermeasures. Whoever sent that message wanted him afraid, wanted him reactive, wanted him making mistakes. They'd succeeded on the fear. He could admit that, but they'd miscalculated on everything else. Because Victor Leone didn't react. He calculated. He planned. He executed with surgical precision, and anyone who threatened the mother of his child had just made the last mistake of their life. His phone rang. Marco. Talk. Burner phone. Bounce through multiple towers. They know what they're doing. Find them anyway. Pull every piece of footage within 6 blocks of that cafe. Someone was watching. I want their face. On it. But boss, if they're this sophisticated, I don't care how sophisticated they are. Find them. Victor's voice was ice. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. This doesn't stop until the threat is eliminated. Understood. Victor ended the call as another text arrived. Marcus. Package secure and en route. Relief crashed through him, temporary but powerful. Lena was safe. For now. He pulled into his building's garage, his mind already 3 steps ahead. This wasn't just about protection anymore. This was war. And in war, Victor Leone didn't defend. He annihilated. His phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number, an image, an ultrasound. Grainy, black and white, a tiny spine, small limbs, a perfect vulnerable life. Below it, 3 words. It's a girl. Victor's breath left him in a rush. His daughter. He was going to have a daughter. Another message. I'm safe. Marcus was professional. But we need to talk about what happens next. This can't be normal. He typed carefully, 24 hours. I'll find the threat. Then we talk. About everything. Her response took time. Finally, 24 hours. Not a minute more. Victor set down his phone and looked at the ultrasound again. His daughter. So small, so fragile, so completely dependent on him to keep her safe. He'd built an empire on calculated violence, on strategic brutality, on being willing to do what others wouldn't. And now he had 24 hours to prove he could protect what mattered without destroying the woman who'd chosen to carry his child alone, rather than live in his shadow. 24 hours to find an enemy sophisticated enough to threaten a ghost. 24 hours to become the kind of father a little girl deserved. The city glittered beyond his windows, beautiful and treacherous. Victor pulled up the ultrasound one more time and made a silent promise to the tiny figure on that screen. Whatever it took. Whoever he had to become. Whatever monster he had to unleash. He would keep her safe. Even if it meant finally confronting the truth Lena had tried to tell him, that sometimes the greatest danger wasn't the enemy outside. It was the protection that felt like prison. The safe house in Morningside Heights occupied the top floor of a pre-war building that looked like every other structure on the block. Brick facade weathered by decades of harsh winters, iron fire escapes zigzagging down the exterior, windows that reflected nothing but the gray afternoon sky. Victor had owned it for 7 years, one of a dozen properties scattered throughout the city that existed on paper under shell companies so layered even forensic accountants would need months to trace them back to him. He stood in the living room now, watching Lena move through the space with the wariness of a woman who'd learned not to trust sanctuary. She'd examined every room when Marcus first brought her here 2 hours ago, checking locks, testing windows, memorizing exits. Old habits from a life she'd tried to leave behind but couldn't quite shake. It's secure, Victor said quietly from where he stood near the window, maintaining the distance she'd demanded, even though every instinct screamed at him to close the gap between them. Reinforced door, bulletproof glass, panic room behind the bookshelf if you need it. No one knows about this place except Marcus and me. Lena turned to face him, her hand resting protectively on her belly. And how long am I supposed to stay here? How long before whoever sent those messages realizes I've disappeared and escalates? That's what I'm working on. Victor pulled out his phone, showing her the preliminary report Marco had sent 20 minutes ago. We've pulled surveillance footage from every camera within a 10-block radius of the cafe. Facial recognition is running now, cross-referencing against known associates of rival organizations, anyone with a grudge, anyone who might have reason to target you to get to me. She crossed her arms, defensive. So you're doing exactly what I asked you not to do. Taking control. Making decisions. Mobilizing your entire organization to solve a problem I never asked you to solve. You're being threatened, Victor said, and he couldn't keep the edge out of his voice. Someone out there knows you're pregnant with my child and is making it clear they can reach you whenever they want. This isn't about control, Lena. This is about keeping you alive. It's always about keeping me alive with you. She moved to the window, looking out at the street below where normal people lived normal lives that didn't involve safe houses and threat assessments. That's how it started, remember? You saw me getting hassled by those men outside the gallery, and you intervened, swept in like some dark avenging angel and made them disappear. And I was so grateful, so impressed by your power and your confidence and the way you made me feel protected. Victor remembered that night with crystalline clarity. Lena in a black dress that made her look like living art, three drunk finance bros who thought money meant they could touch whatever they wanted, and Victor's barely controlled rage at watching someone harass what would become his. He'd handled it quietly, a few words in the right ears, some strategic pressure on their employers, a clear message that Lena Moore was under his protection whether she knew it or not. She'd thanked him over coffee the next day, had smiled at him with genuine warmth and asked how she could repay the favor. And he'd known, with the certainty of a man who recognized something irreplaceable when he saw it, that he was going to marry her. "I didn't know then that protection was your love language," Lena continued, her voice softer now, tinged with sadness. "That you'd wrap me up so completely in safety that I'd forget how to breathe on my own. That every threat you eliminated would be replaced by the bigger threat of losing myself entirely." I never wanted you to lose yourself," Victor said quietly. "I wanted you safe. There's a difference." "Is there?" She turned to face him, and the exhaustion in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. "Because from where I'm standing, they look exactly the same. You decided what I needed. You made choices about my safety without asking what I wanted. And now here we are again, me in a locked room, you orchestrating everything from a distance, and both of us pretending this is somehow different from before." Victor forced himself to take a breath, to think past the defensive anger rising in his chest. She wasn't entirely wrong. He had made unilateral decisions about her security, had activated his network without her explicit consent, had put her in this safe house because the alternative, leaving her vulnerable while he hunted the threat, was unthinkable. But the threat was real. The messages were real. The danger to her and their daughter was concrete and immediate, not some abstract possibility he'd invented to justify control. "What would you have me do?" he asked, and he couldn't keep the frustration from bleeding into his voice. "Someone is watching you, Lena. Someone knows about the baby. Someone is threatening both of you explicitly. Should I just ignore that? Let you walk around the city hoping they don't escalate from surveillance to action?" "I would have you ask me what I want," Lena shot back. "I would have you treat me like a partner in this instead of a problem to be solved. I would have you remember that I'm a grown woman who survived 6 months on my own after leaving you, who built a new life and a new identity and managed just fine until you showed up and dragged me back into your world." "You weren't fine," Victor said flatly. "You were being stalked. You were terrified enough to change your patterns, to start looking over your shoulder, to recognize that something was wrong even if you didn't know what. That's not fine, Lena. That's survival. And survival isn't the same as being safe." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because he was right, and they both knew it. She hadn't been fine. She'd been managing, coping, getting by, but she'd also been scared enough to notice the surveillance, to recognize the pattern of messages for what they were. "Okay," she said finally, sinking down onto the leather sofa that probably cost more than 3 months of her nonprofit salary. "You're right. I was scared. I am scared. But that doesn't mean I want to hand my entire life over to you again, Victor. It doesn't mean I'm ready to accept that your way is the only way." Victor moved carefully, giving her space as he sat in the armchair across from her rather than beside her on the sofa. "Then tell me what you want. Actually tell me, and I'll listen. No assumptions, no unilateral decisions. We do this together." Lena looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the trap, for the manipulation, for the moment when his promise would crack and the old Victor would emerge. "I want to know who's threatening me and why. I want transparency, not you handling everything behind the scenes and feeding me sanitized summaries. And I want a say in how this gets resolved. If there's going to be violence, if people are going to get hurt because of me, I need to know about it. I need to be able to live with the consequences." It went against every instinct Victor had cultivated over 15 years in his world. You didn't involve civilians in operational details. You didn't burden them with the weight of necessary violence. You protected them from the ugly reality of what it took to keep them safe. But Lena wasn't asking to be protected from reality anymore. She was asking to be trusted with it. "All right," he said quietly. "Full transparency. But you have to accept that some of what I tell you is going to be difficult to hear. And you have to trust that when I make tactical decisions in the moment, it's because the situation demands it, not because I'm trying to control you." "I can live with that." Lena pulled her legs up onto the sofa, adjusting her position to accommodate her belly. So tell me, what have you found so far? Victor pulled out his phone, bringing up the report Marco had compiled. The messages came from 3 different burner phones, all purchased with cash from different locations across the city. Whoever's doing this knows how to stay anonymous. But they made one mistake. They've been physically surveilling you, which means they had to be in proximity. We pulled footage from every camera near your apartment, your work, the prenatal clinic you've been using. He swiped through several images showing her grainy security footage time-stamped over the past 3 weeks. We've identified a pattern. Same person, different disguises, but the gate gives them away. Height, build, the way they favor their left side slightly when they walk. Probably an old injury, something that's become muscle memory. Lena leaned forward, studying the images. Can you see their face? Not clearly. They're good. Sunglasses, hats, scarves, even when the weather doesn't call for it. But Marco's running gait analysis software now. We're also cross-referencing the purchase locations for the burner phones, looking for any overlap in security footage. If this person bought all 3 phones themselves, there's a chance we'll get a clear image from one of the stores. And then what? Lena's voice was quiet but steady. When you find them, what happens? This was the moment of truth. The place where Victor had to decide how honest he could afford to be. He looked at the woman across from him, the mother of his child, the only person who'd ever walked away from him and lived, the one person whose opinion of him actually mattered and chose truth over comfort. That depends on who they are and who sent them, he said carefully. If this is a professional hit, someone hired by a rival organization, then we're dealing with institutional threat. Taking out the surveillance operative doesn't solve the problem because they'll just send someone else. In that case, I need to negotiate with whoever gave the order, find out what they want, and either give it to them or make it clear that you're off limits. And if they don't accept that? Lena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Then I eliminate the threat at its source. Victor held her gaze, refusing to soften the reality. Permanently. Completely. In a way that sends a message to anyone else who might consider you a viable target. Lena was quiet for a moment, processing. You're talking about killing people, possibly multiple people, because of me. Because someone threatened you and our daughter, Victor corrected. There's a difference. This isn't random violence, Lena. This is proportional response to an active threat against my family. Your family, she repeated, and something complicated moved across her face. We're divorced, Victor. I left you. I built a life that has nothing to do with you, but because I'm carrying your child, I'm still considered your family in your world. Still something you own that other people can't touch without consequences. The accusation stung because it held a kernel of truth. In his world, family was sacred. You protected what was yours with absolute ruthlessness, and you made examples of anyone foolish enough to test that boundary. It was one of the few universal rules that everyone understood and mostly respected. You're not something I own, Victor said quietly, but you are someone I love. Someone I will always love, regardless of divorce papers or boundaries or how much distance you try to put between us. And that baby you're carrying is mine. Not as property, but as responsibility. As the most important thing I'll ever be part of creating. So yes, I will kill to protect you both if that's what it takes, and I won't apologize for that. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, and Victor saw her shiver despite the warmth of the apartment. I don't know how to reconcile this. The part of me that left you because I couldn't live with the violence anymore, and the part of me that's relieved you're willing to do whatever it takes to keep our babies safe. Those 2 things can't exist together, can they? They exist in you right now, Victor pointed out. You're a woman who helps domestic violence victims escape dangerous situations, but you're also someone who understands that sometimes safety requires force. You left me because you couldn't live with being sheltered from the consequences of my choices, but you're sitting here now asking me to be honest about what those consequences might be. That's not contradiction, Lena. That's complexity. She looked at him with something that might have been surprise or might have been recognition. When did you get philosophical? When I had 6 months to think about why the only woman I've ever loved would rather face the world alone than accept my protection. Victor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice dropping. I've spent half a year trying to understand what I did wrong. replaying every conversation, every decision, every moment where I chose what I thought was best for you without asking what you actually wanted. And I realized something. I treated you like you were fragile, like you needed to be protected from the world and from yourself and from the reality of who I am. But you're not fragile, Lena. You never were. You're strong enough to walk away from everything I could give you because you knew staying would cost you something more valuable than money or security. My sense of self, Lena said softly. It was costing me my sense of self. Every day, a little more of who I was before you got buried under who I had to be to survive being loved by you. I know that now. Victor held her gaze. And I'm sorry for not seeing it then, for not listening when you tried to tell me, for thinking that if I just protected you hard enough, loved you intensely enough, gave you everything material you could want, that would be enough. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, and she swiped at them angrily. Damn hormones. I don't want to cry right now. Then don't. Victor grabbed the box of tissues from the side table and set it within her reach, maintaining the distance between them even though everything in him wanted to cross that space and pull her into his arms. Or do. Whatever you need. There's no judgment here, Lena. Just honesty. She took a tissue, dabbing at her eyes. This isn't how I thought today would go. I thought I'd buy groceries, maybe stop by that bookstore on Market Street, go home and read case files for work. I didn't think I'd see you. Didn't think I'd end up in a safe house having philosophical conversations about violence and protection and whether love and possession are the same thing. For what it's worth, I didn't plan this either, Victor said. I was on my way to a meeting when I saw you at that crosswalk, and my entire world just stopped. Everything I'd been telling myself about respecting your decision, about giving you space, about being noble enough to let you go, it all disintegrated the moment I saw you were pregnant. With your child, Lena added quietly. That matters to you, the biology of it, the fact that this baby is yours. Of course it matters. Victor's voice was rough with emotion he usually kept buried. I'm 42 years old, Lena. I've built an empire and eliminated enemies and accumulated more wealth than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. But I've never created anything good. Never built anything that might outlive me in a meaningful way. And then you, this baby, it's the first truly good thing I've ever been part of. So yes, it matters. It matters more than anything. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. Do you want to feel her move? The question hit Victor like a sucker punch. He hadn't expected it, hadn't even considered the possibility that Lena would offer this level of intimacy after everything they'd said to each other. You said it's a girl? The ultrasound Thursday confirmed it. Lena's expression softened slightly. She's healthy, strong heartbeat, measuring right on schedule. The doctor said everything looks good. And you were going to tell me via text, Victor said, not quite able to keep the hurt from his voice. I didn't know what else to do. Lena's voice was small. I didn't know how to let you in without opening a door I wasn't ready to open. A text felt safer, more controlled. Do you still want me to keep my distance? Victor asked, even though asking felt like volunteering for execution. Because if you do, I'll respect that. I'll stay in this chair and you can tell me about her and I'll listen. But if you're offering what I think you're offering... Come here, Lena said quietly, and it was both an invitation and a test. Victor moved slowly, giving her time to change her mind. He crossed the space between them and sat beside her on the sofa, close enough to feel her warmth but not touching, waiting for permission. Lena took his hand, his right hand, the one that had signed contracts and held weapons and done things she preferred not to think about, and placed it gently on the side of her belly. Just wait. She's been active this afternoon, probably because I'm stressed. She doesn't like it when I'm stressed. They sat in silence for a moment, Victor's palm pressed against the cotton fabric of Lena's dress, his breath held in anticipation. And then he felt it, a flutter, so slight he almost missed it. Then again, stronger this time, a distinct push against his palm, as if their daughter was announcing her presence. Victor's throat went tight. That's her? That's her. Lena's voice was soft, intimate in a way it hadn't been since before the divorce. She's strong, stubborn. The doctor said she's probably going to be tall based on the measurements. She gets that from you, Victor murmured, his attention completely focused on the small movements beneath his hand. The stubbornness, I mean. You're the only person who's ever successfully defied me. I had good motivation. Lena covered his hand with hers, and for a moment they were connected, their daughter between them, both of their hands protective and tender. I was fighting for both of us, for the life I wanted her to have. Another kick, stronger this time. Victor felt something crack inside his chest, some foundational wall he'd built to protect himself from vulnerability and emotion and anything that could be used against him. This tiny person who didn't know him, who had no idea what kind of man her father was, trusted him enough to announce herself, to let him feel her presence. I'm going to keep you both safe, he said, and it was a vow made to the child beneath his palm. Whatever it takes. Whoever I have to become. I promise. That's what I'm afraid of, Lena said softly, but she didn't pull away. The whatever it takes part. Because I know what you're capable of, Victor. I've seen the aftermath, even when you tried to hide it from me, and I'm terrified that keeping us safe is going to require you to become someone even darker than you already are. Then help me find another way. Victor lifted his eyes to meet hers, and for the first time in 6 months, they were close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark irises. You wanted transparency. You wanted to be part of the decisions. So help me figure out how to neutralize this threat without becoming the monster you're afraid of. I don't know if that's possible, Lena admitted. In your world, everything is solved with force or money or fear. How do you eliminate a threat without using the tools you've spent your entire adult life perfecting? By being smarter than they expect. Victor's mind was already working through alternatives, strategies that didn't rely solely on violence. Whoever's doing this wants something. Information, leverage, money, revenge. There's an objective. We find out what it is, we find another way to give it to them or make it irrelevant. And if there isn't another way? Victor was quiet for a moment, his hand still pressed against Lena's belly where their daughter continued her small movements. Then I do what's necessary, but I make sure you and she are never touched by the consequences. That's the best I can offer. Lena pulled back slightly, breaking the physical connection between them. That's the problem, Victor. You can't protect us from the consequences when we are the consequences. Every choice you make in the next few days is going to shape what kind of father you become, what kind of world our daughter grows up in, whether she learns that problems are solved with violence or with something else. She's not even born yet, Victor said, frustration bleeding into his voice. And you're already making me responsible for her entire moral education based on how I handle a threat against her life. Because these choices matter, Lena insisted. Because she's going to grow up asking questions about who her father is and what he does, and I need to know that the answers won't terrify me, that I won't have to lie to protect her from the truth about you. Victor stood abruptly, needing distance to think clearly. He walked back to the window, looking out at the city that had been his kingdom and was now feeling more like a cage. What do you want me to say, Lena? That I'm going to walk away from everything I've built? That I'm going to become someone different overnight because we have a daughter on the way? I can't promise that. I can't even promise I know how to be that person. I'm not asking you to become someone different, Lena said quietly. I'm asking you to want to be different, to care more about being a good father than being a powerful one, to choose our daughter's future over your empire's stability. They're not mutually exclusive. Victor turned to face her. I can be a good father and still run my organization. I can keep you both safe and still maintain the power structure that makes that safety possible. Can you? Lena challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your organization is exactly why we're in danger. If you weren't Victor Leone, feared crime lord, if you were just Victor, some regular guy with a regular job, no one would be threatening me. Our daughter could grow up without security details and safe houses and the constant low-level terror of knowing her father has enemies. If I were some regular guy, you never would have looked at me twice, Victor shot back. You fell in love with who I am, Lena. The power, the confidence, the way I commanded every room I entered. You can't cherry-pick the parts of me you liked and discard the foundation they're built on. You're right. Lena's voice was steady, clear. I fell in love with the whole package. The danger and the power and the intensity of being loved by someone who operated by completely different rules than everyone else. And it was intoxicating. Until it wasn't. until I realized that the same intensity that made me feel special also made me feel trapped. Victor forced himself to take a breath, to step back from the argument that was spiraling into familiar territory. They'd had this fight before, in different words, during the months leading up to their divorce. It never resolved anything, just left them both wounded and further apart. "We're not solving this tonight," he said finally. "Right now, we focus on the immediate threat, on finding out who's watching you and why. The rest, how I run my organization, what kind of father I'm going to be, whether you can ever trust me again, that's all important, but it's secondary to keeping you alive." "Fine." Lena stood as well, crossing her arms. "Then tell me the plan. What happens next?" Victor pulled out his phone, checking the latest update from Marco. "We're narrowing down the suspect pool, cross-referencing the surveillance footage with known operatives from rival organizations. I've also reached out to my contacts in the Bratva, the Colombians, and the Irish. Made it clear that if any of them are behind this, I'm willing to negotiate before things escalate. And if none of them claim responsibility, then we're dealing with someone outside the usual power structure, a lone actor, or someone new trying to make a name for themselves. That's actually more dangerous because unpredictable threats are harder to neutralize." Lena absorbed this, her expression troubled. "How long before you know?" "Marco thinks we'll have actionable intelligence within 12 hours. Maybe less if we get lucky with the facial recognition software." Victor pocketed his phone. "In the meantime, you stay here. Marcus is outside, and I've got 2 more men rotating shifts on the building. No one gets in without my authorization." "And you?" Lena asked. "Where will you be?" "Making calls, applying pressure, reminding certain people that threatening my family is a line that doesn't get crossed." Victor moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll be back in the morning with updates. If you need anything before then, food, clothes, anything, call Marcus. He'll handle it." "Victor." Lena's voice stopped him with his hand on the doorknob. He turned back to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you for listening, for trying to do this differently." "Don't thank me yet," Victor said quietly. "We don't know how this ends." "No," Lena agreed. "But I know you're trying. That's more than I expected." Victor nodded and left before the emotion threatening to overwhelm him could crack his carefully maintained composure. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the physical exertion to clear his head. By the time he reached the street, his phone was already in his hand, a text to Marco. "Meeting, 1 hour. Bring everything we have." The response was immediate. "Done." Victor slid into the back of the car where Marcus waited, his expression professionally neutral. "The penthouse, boss?" "No." Victor pulled up an address on his phone. "The warehouse on Pier 17, and Marcus, make sure we're not followed." "Understood." As the car pulled into traffic, Victor looked out the window at the city lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting, planning their next move against the woman carrying his child. And Victor Leone, the man who'd built an empire on calculated violence and absolute control, was about to remind them why threatening his family was the last mistake they'd ever make. Even if it meant becoming the monster Lena feared, even if it cost him any chance of ever winning her back. Because some things were worth more than redemption. And protecting his daughter was at the top of that very short list. The warehouse on Pier 17 smelled like salt water and diesel fuel, the kind of place that had witnessed too many conversations that ended with bodies in the river. Victor stood in the center of the converted office space, studying the wall of monitors Marco had set up, each screen displaying different angles of surveillance footage, facial recognition matches, and data streams that painted a picture of the threat stalking Lena. Marco stood beside him, tablet in hand, his expression grim. "We've got a positive ID. Took longer than I expected because he's been off the grid for 3 years, but the gate analysis finally flagged him." Victor's jaw tightened. "Who?" "Alexei Volkov, former Bratva enforcer, went independent after Dmitry consolidated power. He's a ghost, works contract jobs for whoever pays the highest price, specializes in psychological operations and long-term surveillance." Marco swiped through several images on the tablet, showing the same man in different disguises across multiple locations. "He's good, boss. One of the best at what he does." "Who hired him?" Victor's voice was cold, flat, the tone that meant someone was about to have a very bad night. That's where it gets interesting. Marco pulled up a financial trail on the main monitor. The payments are coming through a series of shell companies, but I tracked them back to a source you're going to recognize. Remember Vincent Calabrese? Victor's blood went cold. Vincent Calabrese. The old guard, the man whose territory Victor had absorbed 5 years ago during the consolidation that had made him the undisputed power in the eastern districts. Vincent had disappeared after that, supposedly retired to Florida with his wife and grandchildren, content to live out his days on the beach with his remaining wealth intact. Vincent's been dead for 2 years, Victor said flatly. Heart attack in Tampa. I sent flowers to the funeral. That's what everyone thought. Marco's expression was carefully neutral. Turns out the heart attack was real, but it didn't kill him. He survived, spent 6 months in recovery, and apparently used that time to plan this. His son Anthony has been running the financial side. Clean money, legitimate businesses, nothing that would flag our attention. But underneath, they've been building something, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Victor absorbed this information with the cold calculation of a man who'd spent years anticipating betrayal. Vincent had always been smart, strategic, willing to play the long game. Of course, he wouldn't just accept defeat and fade quietly into retirement. Men like Vincent didn't let go of power willingly. What's the objective? Victor asked. Revenge? Money? Territory? All three, probably. Marco pulled up another file. But the immediate goal seems to be leverage. They know about Lena, about the baby. They've been watching her for weeks, building a profile, establishing patterns. This isn't about killing her, boss. That would be too simple, too final. This is about having something you care about that they can threaten, something that gives them negotiating power. Victor's hands clenched into fists. They want to use my daughter as a bargaining chip. Looks that way, and they're patient. They haven't made any direct moves yet, just sent messages to let Lena know she's being watched, to make her scared, to make her come to you for protection, which brings you into the open where your emotional investment becomes a weakness they can exploit. How many people does Vincent have? Victor was already running calculations, assessing resources and vulnerabilities. Hard to say. Anthony's been careful not to attract attention, but based on financial movements, we're estimating a team of maybe 15 to 20 operatives. Not enough to challenge your organization directly, but enough to cause significant problems if they're strategic about it. Victor studied the monitors, his mind 3 steps ahead. Vincent understood that a direct assault would fail. Victor's organization was too well established, too powerful, too deeply embedded in the city's power structure. But a surgical strike against a pregnant woman with no security? That was achievable. And once they had Lena, they'd have everything. Where's Vincent now? Victor's voice was deadly calm. We're still tracking that. He's careful, doesn't stay in one place long. But based on the pattern of financial transactions and communication intercepts, we think he's somewhere in the city, close enough to oversee the operation personally. Victor's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but he recognized the pattern, routed through the same encryption Alexei Volkov had been using. He opened it, his expression darkening as he read. The message was simple. She's beautiful when she sleeps. So peaceful. Would be a shame if something disturbed that peace. Attached was a photo, grainy, taken through a window with a telephoto lens. Lena, asleep on the sofa in the safe house, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Victor's vision went red. They'd found her. Despite all his precautions, despite the security and the careful protocols, someone had located the safe house and gotten close enough to photograph her through the window. Marco. His voice was ice. Get a team to Morningside Heights, now. Full lockdown protocol. No one in or out until I give the word. Marco was already moving, phone to his ear, barking orders. Victor forwarded the image to his tablet and zoomed in, studying every detail. The angle suggested the photo was taken from the building across the street, probably from one of the vacant apartments he'd confirmed was empty when he'd secured the location. Except it clearly wasn't empty anymore. His phone rang. Marcus. We've got a problem, boss. Someone tripped the perimeter alarm on the east side. I've got eyes on a suspicious vehicle parked 2 blocks over, engine running, driver sitting inside like he's waiting for something. Lock down the building, Victor ordered. Get Lena to the panic room. Nobody moves until my team arrives. On it. Victor ended the call and turned to Marco. How long until the team gets there? 8 minutes? Maybe less if traffic cooperates. 8 minutes. A lifetime when someone with hostile intent was circling the building where the mother of his child was sleeping. Victor grabbed his keys, already moving toward the door. "Boss, wait!" Marco started. "You have operational control here. Find Vincent. I want his exact location within the hour." Victor's tone left no room for argument. "And Marco? When we find him, this ends, permanently. No negotiations, no mercy. He threatened my family." Marco nodded, understanding perfectly. "Consider it done." Victor took the stairs 3 at a time, his mind already calculating routes and timing. The warehouse was 20 minutes from Morningside Heights in normal traffic, but at this hour, pushing the Aston Martin to its limits, he could make it in 12. He just hoped 12 minutes would be enough. The city blurred past as Victor navigated through traffic with the precision of someone who'd spent years learning every shortcut and back route. His phone rang continuously, updates from Marco, status reports from the security team, messages from various associates wanting to know why half his organization was mobilizing on a Thursday night. He ignored all of it except the updates about Lena. Marcus had gotten her to the panic room, a reinforced steel chamber behind the bookshelf that could withstand anything short of military-grade explosives. She was safe for now, protected by 3 inches of hardened steel and a ventilation system that could sustain her for 72 hours if necessary. But Victor knew that wasn't the point. The photo had been sent to demonstrate capability, to prove that his precautions meant nothing if Vincent wanted to reach Lena. The message was clear. We can get to her whenever we want. His phone buzzed again. This time, a call from a number he recognized, one of his contacts in the Bratva, a man who owed him more favors than he could count. "Dmitri," Victor answered, not bothering with pleasantries. "Tell me you have good news." "Depends on your definition of good." The Russian's accent was thick, his tone cautious. "I hear Vincent Calabrese is making noise, asking questions about your personal life, offering money for information about weak points in your security." "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing, obviously. You and I have arrangement. But Victor, he's offering serious money. $250,000 for actionable intelligence on the woman you were married to. People are noticing. People are asking questions." Victor's grip tightened on the steering wheel. $250,000. Vincent was desperate, throwing money around to anyone who might have information about Lena, which meant his timeline was accelerating, which meant the threat was becoming more immediate. "I need Vincent's location," Victor said flatly. "Tonight, whatever it costs." "That kind of information is expensive," Dmitri hedged. "Vincent has friends still, people who would consider it betrayal to—" "Name your price." There was a pause. $2 million, cash, plus consideration on the territory dispute we've been negotiating. It was extortion, plain and simple. Dmitri was using Victor's desperation to extract maximum value. Under normal circumstances, Victor would have shut it down, reminded the Russian exactly who held the power in their relationship. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Done," Victor said. "But I need it in the next hour. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. I'll make calls." "But Victor, be careful. Vincent is not the man you remember. Prison, recovery, loss of power, it has made him unpredictable, dangerous in ways that are hard to anticipate." "I'm counting on it," Victor said and ended the call. He pulled up to the safe house building with the Aston Martin's tires screaming protest. The security team had arrived, 3 SUVs parked in defensive positions, men in tactical gear securing the perimeter. Marcus met him at the entrance, his expression grim. "She's secure in the panic room. Hasn't said anything since I moved her, just asked if you were coming." "The suspicious vehicle?" "Gone. Cleared out the minute our team arrived. We've got units trying to track it, but whoever was driving knew what they were doing. Lost us in traffic within 3 blocks. Victor nodded, already moving toward the elevator. "I want this building swept. Every apartment, every closet, every possible vantage point. If there's so much as a hidden camera, I want to know about it." "Already in progress, boss." The elevator ride to the top floor felt interminable. Victor forced himself to breathe, to maintain control, to not let the fear and rage threatening to overwhelm him crack the careful discipline he'd cultivated. Lena needed him calm, focused, capable. She didn't need the monster lurking just beneath his surface. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it, except now it felt violated. Someone had been watching through these windows, photographing Lena in what should have been a secure location. The safe house, his fail-safe, his backup plan, the place he'd prepared for exactly this kind of scenario, had been compromised. Marcus led him to the bookshelf and pressed the hidden switch. The entire unit swung inward, revealing the steel door of the panic room beyond. Victor entered the security code and the door unsealed with a hydraulic hiss. Lena sat on the narrow cot inside, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale but composed. She looked up as he entered, and something in her expression made his chest ache. "They found me," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "They found the location." Victor kept his voice steady. "But they didn't get to you. You're safe." "For how long?" Lena's laugh was bitter. "How long before they find the next safe house, and the next one after that? How long before running and hiding becomes our entire existence?" Victor sat beside her on the cot, careful to maintain some distance. "It's not going to come to that. We know who's behind this now. Vincent Calabrese, a man I thought was dead. He's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to strike back." "Why me?" Lena's voice cracked slightly. "Why not go after you directly? Why target someone who doesn't even live in your world anymore?" "Because you're my weakness." Victor forced himself to meet her eyes, to give her the honesty she'd demanded. "He knows that attacking me directly would fail. I'm too protected, too prepared. But you? You're vulnerable. And more importantly, I care about you in a way that makes me irrational. Makes me willing to negotiate, to make concessions, to trade things I'd never normally give up just to keep you safe." Lena was quiet for a moment, processing. "So this is my fault. For leaving you, for thinking I could build a life separate from yours. I painted a target on my back the moment I walked away." "No." Victor's tone was firm. "This is Vincent's fault for being foolish enough to threaten my family. And it's my fault for not anticipating that someone from my past would eventually try to use you against me." He paused. "But it ends tonight. My people are hunting Vincent down as we speak. When we find him, this threat disappears." "You're going to kill him?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." Lena drew her knees up as much as her belly would allow, wrapping her arms around them. "And you want me to be okay with that? To accept that violence is the only solution?" "I want you to be alive," Victor corrected. "I want our daughter to be born into a world where she's not being used as leverage against me. I want you to be able to sleep without wondering if someone's watching through the window. That's what I want, Lena. The method I use to achieve it is secondary." "It's not secondary to me." She turned to face him fully. "Every person you kill leaves behind family, friends, people who might decide to continue this cycle of revenge. How does this end, Victor? When does the violence stop? When people understand that threatening my family is a line that results in their complete destruction." Victor's voice was cold, matter of fact. "I can't eliminate every potential threat in the world, but I can make examples clear enough that most people choose to stay away. And the ones who don't? The ones who are crazy enough or desperate enough or angry enough to try anyway? I handle them the same way I'm going to handle Vincent." Lena shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. That loving you means accepting a life where problems are solved with murder, where our daughter grows up thinking this is normal." "She'll grow up safe," Victor said. "That's what matters." "No." Lena's voice was stronger now, fueled by emotion and conviction. "What matters is that she grows up knowing there are other options. That violence isn't the first solution or the only solution, that her father tried everything else before he resorted to killing someone." Victor felt frustration building in his chest. "And what exactly do you propose I do, Lena? Sit down with Vincent over coffee and negotiate? Ask him politely to stop threatening the mother of my child? This isn't a business dispute or a misunderstanding. This is a man who wants revenge for territory I took from him, and he's willing to hurt you and our daughter to get it. Then give him what he wants." Lena's hands flew up in exasperation. "Give him back his territory, or pay him off, or find some other way to make this go away that doesn't involve killing people." "And then what?" Victor's control was slipping, anger bleeding into his voice. "I show weakness. I demonstrate that threatening my family is an effective strategy, and every other enemy I've made over the years sees an opportunity, I'll spend the rest of my life fending off attacks because I established a precedent that I can be manipulated through you. So we're trapped, Lena said quietly. There's no way out that doesn't involve violence. Not if you want to be safe. Victor forced himself to breathe, to pull back from the edge of the argument. I'm sorry, Lena. I know this isn't the answer you want, but it's the reality of the world I operate in. Before Lena could respond, Victor's phone rang. Marco. We found him. Vincent's holed up in a warehouse in Red Hook, small security detail. Looks like he's preparing to move locations. If we're going to do this, it needs to be now. Victor stood, his decision made. Assemble the team. I want this clean, quiet, and final. No witnesses, no complications. Boss, Marco hesitated. Vincent's got his son with him. Anthony, you want us to… Everyone, Victor said coldly. Anyone in that warehouse is part of this operation. No exceptions. He ended the call and turned back to Lena, who was staring at him with an expression that combined horror and resignation. You're really going to do this, she said. I have to. No, you don't. You choose to. There's a difference. Victor crouched in front of her, bringing himself to eye level. When our daughter is born, I'm going to make a lot of choices. Some of them will be wrong, some will be questionable. But this one? This is the right choice. Vincent threatened you, threatened her. He made himself an active danger to my family, and in my world, that has only one consequence. Then I don't know if I can do this, Lena whispered. I don't know if I can co-parent with someone who solves problems by killing people. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Victor felt something crack inside him, some hope he'd been carrying that maybe, somehow, they could find a way back to each other. You don't have to co-parent, he said quietly. You just have to let me keep you safe. Everything else, custody, visitation, how involved I am in her life, we'll figure that out later. But right now, tonight, I need you to trust that I'm doing what's necessary. Lena looked at him for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. I do trust that you think this is necessary. That's the problem. I trust your intentions, Victor. I just don't trust your methods. Victor stood, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. I'll have Marcus stay with you. The panic room is secure, and I'll have men on every floor of the building. You'll be safe while I handle this. And then what? Lena's voice was small, defeated. You come back with blood on your hands and we pretend everything's fine? Then we figure out what comes next. Victor moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. I love you, Lena. I probably always will. But I love our daughter more, and I'll do anything, become anyone, sacrifice anything, to make sure she gets to be born into a world where she's safe, even if that means losing you in the process. He left before she could respond, before the tears threatening to break through his control could compromise the cold focus he needed for what came next. Marcus was waiting outside the panic room, his expression carefully neutral. She's secure, Victor asked. As secure as possible. But boss, the photo they sent came from the building across the street. We've swept it, found the apartment they used. There was equipment, professional-grade surveillance gear. Whoever was watching knew exactly what they were doing. Alexei Volkov, Victor said. Former Bratva, works contract jobs. He's probably long gone by now, but I want his face sent to every contact we have. If he shows up anywhere in this city, I want to know about it. Already done. Victor headed for the elevator, his phone already in his hand, pulling up the encrypted messaging app his organization used for sensitive communications. He typed quickly. Moving on the Red Hook location. Full team, execute on my signal. No survivors. 3 responses came back immediately, each a simple confirmation from the team leaders who'd be coordinating the assault. Victor had built his organization on discipline and efficiency. When he gave an order, people moved. The drive to Red Hook took 30 minutes, time Victor used to prepare mentally for what was coming. He'd killed before many times, when the situation demanded it, but it had been years since he'd personally participated in something like this. Usually he delegated, let his people handle the messy details while he maintained the strategic distance that kept his hands technically clean. But this was different. This was personal. Vincent had threatened Lena, had sent men to photograph her sleeping, to terrorize her, to use her pregnancy as leverage. That kind of violation demanded a personal response. The warehouse district was dark and industrial, the kind of place where shipping containers stacked like building blocks and the smell of the river mixed with diesel and rust. Victor's convoy pulled up 2 blocks from the target location, the vehicles spreading out to cover all possible exits. Marco appeared at his window, tactical vest already on, weapon secured at his side. Teams in position. We've got eyes on 4 guards outside, probably another 6 to 8 inside based on heat signatures. Vincent and Anthony are in the main office on the 2nd floor. Rules of engagement? One of the team leaders asked over the radio. Victor thought of Lena's tears, of her accusation that he chose violence when other options existed. He thought of their daughter growing inside her, innocent and unaware of the war being fought to protect her before she was even born, and he made his choice. "Take them all," he said quietly. "Make it quick." The assault was over in less than 4 minutes. Victor's team moved with military precision, neutralizing the exterior guards before they could raise an alarm, breaching the warehouse through 3 separate entry points simultaneously. The sounds of suppressed gunfire echoed briefly in the cavernous space before silence descended again. Victor entered through the main door, stepping over bodies he didn't look at too closely, forcing himself to maintain emotional distance from the carnage his order had created. Marco led him up the metal stairs to the 2nd floor, where Vincent's office sat behind a wall of reinforced glass. Vincent Calabrese sat behind an old desk, his hands raised in surrender, his expression a mixture of defiance and fear. He looked older than Victor remembered, grayer, thinner, the illness and recovery having carved deep lines into his face. Beside him, Anthony stood frozen, his youth and inexperience making him shake visibly as armed men filled the room. "Victor," Vincent said, his voice raspy. "I wondered when you'd come. You threatened my family." Victor's tone was conversational, almost friendly, which made it more terrifying. "You sent a man to watch the mother of my child, to photograph her, to terrorize her. I wanted to get your attention." Vincent lowered his hand slowly. "Seems I succeeded." "You did." Victor pulled out his gun, the weight familiar in his hand. "You wanted revenge for territory I took 5 years ago. For power you lost. I understand that. In your position, I might have done the same." "But," Vincent prompted, "but you made it personal. You brought a pregnant woman into this, an innocent, and that, Vincent, is where you miscalculated. Because I would have negotiated with you over territory, would have found some arrangement we could both live with. But the moment you threatened her..." Victor's finger moved to the trigger. "You made this about family, and family is non-negotiable." "Wait," Anthony started, but Vincent cut him off with a sharp gesture. "He's going to kill us both regardless," the old man said tiredly. "Let him at least do it with dignity." Victor met Vincent's eyes, saw the resignation there, the understanding that this had always been the only possible ending. Then he pulled the trigger twice, clean, professional, final. Anthony screamed, trying to run, but one of Victor's men stopped him before he made it 3 steps. The young man collapsed to his knees, sobbing, begging for his life. Victor felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no emotion at all. Just the cold certainty that this was necessary, that Lena and his daughter would be safe because of it. He nodded to Marco, who handled the rest while Victor walked back to his car. His hands were steady as he slid behind the wheel. His breathing was calm. His mind was already moving to the next problem, finding Alexei Volkov, securing Lena's long-term safety, figuring out how to explain to the woman he loved that he'd just killed 2 people to protect her. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Emergency. Lena's in distress. Medical issue. We're taking her to Mount Sinai." Victor's heart stopped. The cold calm that had carried him through the last hour shattered completely, as fear unlike anything he'd experienced crashed through him. He was moving before conscious thought, the Aston Martin screaming away from the warehouse as he dialed Marcus. "What happened?" Victor demanded the second the call connected. "She started having pain, sharp pain in her abdomen. She's bleeding, boss." "Not a lot, but enough that we're not taking chances. Paramedics are with her now." "Is the baby..." "I don't know. They're monitoring the heartbeat, trying to stabilize her. But Victor, She's asking for you." The city blurred past as Victor pushed the car past every speed limit, every safety parameter. Nothing mattered except getting to Lena, to his daughter, to the two people who'd become the entire center of his universe without him fully realizing it until this moment. The warehouse, the bodies, Vincent's execution, all of it faded into meaningless background noise compared to the terror of possibly losing them both. He'd killed to protect her, and now he might lose her anyway. Victor abandoned the Aston Martin in the emergency lane at Mount Sinai, keys still in the ignition, door hanging open. Security would deal with it, or they wouldn't. He didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the automated glass doors sliding open ahead of him and the fluorescent-lit hallway beyond where, somewhere, in one of these sterile rooms, Lena was fighting to keep their daughter alive. A nurse tried to intercept him at the reception desk, clipboard in hand and protocol on her lips, but something in his expression made her step back. Victor moved past her like she didn't exist, his eyes scanning the corridor for Marcus, for anyone who could tell him where Lena was. "Mr. Leone." A doctor emerged from one of the exam rooms, her scrubs marked with the faint evidence of recent activity. She was young, composed, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. Your wife is stable, but we need to talk." "Ex-wife," Victor corrected automatically, then immediately regretted the clarification because it felt like denying something fundamental. "Where is she?" "Exam room 3. But before you go in, you need to understand the situation." Dr. Chen's tone was professional, but not unkind. "Ms. Moore experienced what we call a placental abruption, a partial separation of the placenta from the uterine wall. It caused bleeding and significant pain, which is what brought her in." Victor's throat went tight. "The baby?" "The baby's heartbeat is strong. We're monitoring continuously, and so far, the fetus appears stable. But Mr. Leone, placental abruption is serious. It can be caused by trauma, high blood pressure, or, in cases like this, extreme stress." Dr. Chen's eyes held his meaningfully. "Ms. Moore's blood pressure when she arrived was dangerously elevated. She was in a state of acute emotional distress that manifested physically. The implication hit Victor like a physical blow, the stress he'd caused by dragging her back into his world, by putting her in a safe house, by leaving to kill Vincent while she sat in that panic room knowing exactly what he was doing. It had nearly cost them their daughter. "Can I see her?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Yes, but understand that what she needs now is calm, stability. We've given her medication to help stop the bleeding and reduce uterine contractions. But the most important intervention is reducing her stress levels. If this continues, if her blood pressure stays elevated, we may be looking at early delivery, which at 26 weeks would be extremely risky." 26 weeks. Victor did the math quickly. 14 weeks early. Dangerously premature. The kind of early that meant months in the NICU if the baby survived at all. "I understand," he said, though understanding and being able to fix it were entirely different things. Dr. Chen stepped aside, gesturing toward the exam room. "She's awake, scared but stable for now. The next 24 hours are critical." Victor nodded and pushed through the door, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the violence he'd just orchestrated and everything to do with the woman lying in the hospital bed ahead. Lena looked impossibly small against the white sheets, her face pale except for the dark circles under her eyes. Monitors surrounded her, tracking her heart rate, the baby's heart rate, her blood pressure, the contractions that could signal the beginning of premature labor. An IV ran to her left arm, pumping medication Victor didn't understand but desperately hoped would work. Her eyes opened when she heard the door, and when she saw him, something complicated moved across her face. Relief and anger and fear all tangled together. "You came," she said quietly. "Of course I came." Victor moved to the chair beside her bed, sitting carefully, keeping his hands to himself even though every instinct screamed at him to touch her, to reassure himself she was real and breathing. "How are you feeling?" "Like my body is trying to reject our daughter because I can't handle the stress of your world." Lena's laugh was bitter and exhausted. "The doctor says it's placental abruption, that I need to stay calm or I could go into early labor." "I heard." Victor swallowed hard. "Lena, I'm so sorry. I never meant for—" "You killed them, didn't you?" She cut him off, her eyes searching his face. Vincent and his son, that's where you were when this started. Victor considered lying, softening the truth, but he'd promised her transparency. Yes. Lena closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. I was sitting in that panic room, surrounded by steel walls and knowing you were out there doing exactly what I'd asked you not to do. And I could feel her inside me, moving, trusting me to keep her safe. But I couldn't keep her safe, Victor. Because the thing threatening her wasn't outside. It was the stress of knowing her father was becoming a killer to protect her. I've always been a killer, Victor said quietly. Tonight wasn't the first time. Won't be the last. That's who I am, Lena. That's the foundation everything else is built on. I know. She opened her eyes, and the pain in them made his chest ache. That's what makes this so impossible. You did what you thought you had to do. You eliminated the threat, and it nearly killed our daughter anyway because I couldn't handle the reality of it. Victor reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand carefully, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. The doctor said you need to stay calm. That stress is the enemy right now, so tell me what you need. What can I do to make this better? I don't know if you can make it better, Lena's voice cracked. How do I stay calm knowing that our daughter's life is going to be full of this? That there will always be another Vincent, another threat, another reason for you to choose violence? How do I bring her into a world where her father's solution to problems is killing people? You don't have to bring her into that world. The words came out before Victor had fully thought them through, but once said, he recognized their truth. You can raise her away from all of this. Away from me, if that's what it takes. Lena stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe you were right. Maybe the best thing I can do for both of you is stay away. Provide financial support, make sure you have everything you need, but keep my distance. Let you raise her in peace without the constant threat of my world bleeding into yours. You do that? Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. You'd walk away from your daughter? I'd do anything to keep you both alive. Victor's grip on her hand tightened slightly. And if that means loving her from a distance, if it means never being part of her life so that she can have a normal childhood without bodyguards and safe houses and the constant fear of retaliation, then yes, I'll do that. Lena was quiet for a long moment. The only sound in the room, the steady beep of the monitors tracking 2 heartbeats that meant everything. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. That's the first time you've ever put what I need ahead of what you want. No. Victor met her eyes. It's the first time I've been smart enough to realize they're the same thing. You need safety and peace. I want you and our daughter alive and healthy. Those aren't competing interests, Lena. They're identical. A knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Chen entered, checking the monitors with a practiced eye. How are we doing, Ms. Moore? Tired, Lena admitted. Scared. Understandable. The good news is your vitals are stabilizing. Blood pressure is coming down, contractions are slowing. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Dr. Chen made a note on her tablet. We'll want to keep you for observation for at least 48 hours. If everything stays stable, we can talk about discharge with strict bed rest protocols. 48 hours, Victor repeated. She'll be safe here? Dr. Chen gave him a curious look. This is a hospital, Mr. Leone. We have security. But yes, she'll be safe. I'll post guards anyway, Victor said, discreet, outside the room. Nobody gets in who isn't medical staff. Victor, Lena started, but Dr. Chen interrupted. Actually, that might not be a terrible idea. Hospital security is good for general threats, but if you have specific concerns, private security could provide an extra layer of protection. Just make sure they stay out of the way of medical staff. The doctor left, and Lena turned to Victor with an expression somewhere between exasperation and resignation. You're really going to post guards at my hospital room? Alexei Volkov is still out there, Victor said. The man Vincent hired to watch you. He wasn't at the warehouse, which means he's still operational. Until I confirm he's no longer a threat, yes, I'm posting guards. And after you confirm it? After you find him and kill him too? Lena's voice was tired, defeated. When does it end, Victor? I don't know, he admitted. I wish I had a better answer, But I can't promise you it ends, Lena. I can only promise that I'll do everything in my power to keep it away from you and our daughter. Lena's free hand moved to her belly, her expression softening slightly as she felt movement beneath her palm. She's active. The doctor said that's good, that it means she's not in distress. Can I? Victor hesitated. Can I feel? Lena studied his face for a moment, then guided his hand to join hers on her belly. They sat in silence, both feeling the small movements of their daughter, proof that despite everything, despite the violence and fear and impossible choices, something good was fighting to survive. I don't want you to disappear from her life, Lena said quietly. That's not what I want, even if part of me thinks it would be easier. She deserves to know her father, to have you in her life in some way. But, Victor prompted, hearing the unspoken caveat, but I need you to try, really try, to find ways to solve problems that don't involve killing people, to think about what kind of man you want to be for her before you make decisions. Lena's eyes met his. I need you to want to be better, Victor, not because I'm asking you to, but because she deserves a father who's trying to be more than just a powerful man who protects through violence. Victor felt the weight of that request settle on his shoulders. She wasn't asking him to change overnight, wasn't demanding he abandon everything he'd built or become someone completely different. She was asking him to try, to want to be better. It seemed like such a small thing, but for a man who'd spent his entire adult life perfecting one particular approach to survival and power, it felt monumental. I'll try, he said finally. I can't promise I'll always get it right. Can't promise there won't be situations where violence is still the answer. But I'll try to think first, to look for other options, to consider what kind of example I'm setting for her. That's all I'm asking. Lena's hand covered his where it rested on her belly. Just try. Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it initially, but it buzzed again insistently. With an apologetic look at Lena, he pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Marco. Found Volkov. He's at a motel in Queens, packing to leave the city. Team is in position, awaiting your orders. This was it. The moment where Victor had to decide whether his promise to try meant anything, or if it was just empty words to make Lena feel better. The old Victor, the one from even 12 hours ago, would have ordered the hit immediately. Clean, simple, final. Eliminate the threat before it could escape. But he looked at Lena, at the monitors tracking their daughter's heartbeat, at the exhaustion and fear and fragile hope in the eyes of the woman he loved. And he made a different choice. He typed, "Hold position. Do not engage. I'm coming to you." Then he stood, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to Lena's forehead. I have to go handle something, but I'll be back in a few hours. And Lena? I'm going to try. What are you going to do? She asked, searching his face. Something different, Victor said. Something that doesn't involve killing someone unless I absolutely have to. He left before she could question further, already calling Marco as he strode down the hospital corridor. Give me everything on Volkov, background, motivations, vulnerabilities, everything. Boss, we've got him dead to rights. He's alone, unprepared. This is a clean elimination. I didn't ask for your tactical assessment, Victor cut him off. I asked for information. Now give it to me. There was a pause, then Marco's voice came back, carefully neutral. Volkov's ex-Bratva, like we discussed, left 3 years ago after Dmitri killed his brother during the consolidation. He's been doing contract work since, but he's in debt, gambling problem. Owes serious money to some very unpleasant people. How much? $250,000, give or take. Victor's mind was already working through the angles. And Vincent paid him what for this job? Based on the financial records we pulled, looks like $50,000 up front, $50,000 on completion. Except there won't be a completion now that Vincent's dead. So Volkov was desperate, in debt, and had just lost his payday when Victor eliminated his employer. That created options that hadn't existed before. I'm coming to the location, Victor said. Nobody moves until I get there. And Marco? I want a secure line set up. I'm going to talk to him. Talk? Marco's surprise was evident. Boss, he photographed your wife. He's been surveilling her for weeks. He terrorized a pregnant woman, and you want to negotiate? I want to see if there's another way to neutralize this threat, Victor said. And if there isn't, then we do it your way. but I'm going to try something first. The motel in Queens was exactly the kind of place people went to disappear. Cash only, no questions asked, security cameras that hadn't worked in years. Victor's convoy pulled up 2 blocks away, and he approached on foot with Marco and 2 other men flanking him at a discreet distance. Volkov's room was on the second-floor corner unit, curtains drawn. Marco had positioned men at every exit, making escape impossible. They had every advantage. All Victor had to do was give the word. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number Marco had provided, Volkov's cell, which intelligence suggested he still had on him. It rang 3 times before a cautious voice answered in Russian-accented English. "Who is this?" "Victor Leon. I believe you've been watching my ex-wife." There was a long pause, then Volkov laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "So Vincent is dead, and now you've come for me. I expected as much." "I've come to talk," Victor said. "You have 2 minutes to come out of that room with your hands visible. If you do, we have a conversation. If you don't, my men come in and this ends the way you expect it to end." "And if I come out, what? You kill me in the parking lot instead of in my room? Forgive me if I don't see the advantage. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead," Victor said flatly. "I have 8 men surrounding this building. You're alone, unprepared, and trapped. I don't need to lure you out to kill you. I'm offering you something else. 2 minutes, starting now." He ended the call and waited. Beside him, Marco shifted slightly, hand resting on his weapon. "Boss, this could be a trap. He could be armed, could be planning to—" "He's planning to survive," Victor interrupted. "That's what men like Volkov do. They survive, and right now the only way he survives is by taking this meeting." 90 seconds later, the motel room door opened. Volkov emerged slowly, hands raised and empty, his expression wary. He was exactly as the surveillance photos suggested. Mid-40s, average height, the kind of man who could blend into any crowd. Unremarkable except for the intelligence in his eyes and the way he moved with the economy of someone trained in violence. "I'm coming down," Volkov called out. "Don't shoot." "Nobody's shooting," Victor replied. "Not unless you give them a reason." Volkov descended the exterior stairs carefully, maintaining his visible hands until he stood 10 feet from Victor. Up close, he looked tired, desperate, like a man who'd made too many bad choices and was running out of options. "Vincent Calabrese hired you to watch Lena Moore," Victor said, not bothering with preamble. "To gather intelligence, to send threatening messages, to make her afraid. You did your job. And now Vincent's dead, which means your contract is void, and your remaining payment isn't coming." "So you know everything," Volkov said flatly. "What do you want from me? A confession? An apology? I was doing a job, Leon. Nothing personal." "You photographed a pregnant woman through her window," Victor said, his voice cold. "You terrorized her to the point that she's currently in the hospital because the stress nearly caused her to lose the baby. You tell me there's nothing personal about that. I'll put a bullet in you right now and sleep fine tonight." Volkov's jaw tightened, but he held Victor's gaze. "So do it. I knew the risks when I took the contract. I won't beg." "I'm not asking you to beg." Victor pulled out his phone, bringing up a banking app. "I'm offering you a deal. You have debts. $250,000 to some people who won't accept late payments gracefully. I'll pay them off. All of it. In exchange, you disappear. Leave the city, leave the East Coast entirely, and never come within 1,000 miles of Lena Moore again." Volkov stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. "You're paying me? After everything I did?" "I'm paying your debts and funding your relocation," Victor corrected. "There's a difference. You take the money, you clear your obligations, and you start over somewhere else. Or you refuse, and I handle this the way you expected me to handle it. Your choice." "Why?" Volkov's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Why offer me anything instead of just killing me?" Victor thought of Lena in that hospital bed, of her plea for him to try to find other ways, of his daughter's heartbeat on the monitor, and the realization that every choice he made now was setting a precedent for what kind of man he'd be for her. "Because my daughter deserves a father who tries," Victor said quietly, "who looks for solutions that don't involve adding bodies to the pile, and because you're not the real threat here. You were just hired muscle doing a job. Vincent was the threat, and he's already handled." Volkov was quiet for a long moment, studying Victor's face. There's a catch. There's always a catch. The catch is that if you ever surface again, if I hear you've taken another contract anywhere near my family, if you so much as think about Lena Moore after today, I won't offer you money. I'll offer you the end I'm giving you the chance to avoid right now. And it won't be quick. Understood. Volkov lowered his hand slowly. How does this work? You give Marco your debt holders' information. He wires the money directly to them, clearing your obligations. Then he gives you $50,000 cash for relocation expenses. You have 24 hours to be out of the city. After that, if any of my people see you, the deal is void. Victor nodded to Marco, who approached with a tablet already prepared. Volkov spent 15 minutes providing account details, contact information, and proof of his debts. Marco verified everything in real time, making calls and executing transfers that would have seemed impossible to anyone who didn't understand how much power Victor wielded. When it was done, Marco handed Volkov a plain envelope thick with cash. 24 hours, starting now. Volkov took the envelope, his expression still wary, like he couldn't quite believe this was real. Why do I feel like I just made a deal with the devil? Because you did, Victor said. But unlike most deals with the devil, this one you'll actually survive. Don't waste the opportunity. Volkov nodded once, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the night with the envelope clutched in his hand. Victor watched him go, aware of Marco's confused silence beside him. Boss, Marco said carefully, what the hell just happened? I tried something different, Victor said, and it worked. Volkov's neutralized, the threat is eliminated, and I didn't have to kill anyone to make it happen. You paid $250,000 plus $50,000 cash to a man who terrorized your wife. Ex-wife, Victor corrected automatically. And yes, I did, because Lena asked me to try to find other solutions, and this was one. Volkov's gone. He won't be back because he knows I showed him mercy once and won't do it again. The end result is the same. He's no longer a threat, but the method is different. Marco was quiet for a moment. And if he comes back? If he takes your money and still causes problems? Then I'll handle it the old way, Victor said. But Marco? I don't think he will. Men like Volkov understand honor among thieves. I gave him a chance to start over, and he'll take it because the alternative is death. That's a powerful motivator for compliance. They walked back to the cars, Victor's mind already returning to the hospital, to Lena, to the conversation they still needed to have about what came next. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Miss Moore is resting. Vitals stable. Doctor says she's out of immediate danger. Relief washed through him, profound and overwhelming. She was safe. Their daughter was safe. And he'd managed to neutralize the threat without adding more violence to the ledger. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Like maybe, possibly, he could actually be the kind of man Lena needed him to be. The kind of father their daughter deserved. The drive back to Mount Sinai was quiet, Victor lost in thought. When he finally made it back to Lena's room, visiting hours were technically over, but the nurses had learned not to argue with the man who'd posted private security throughout the maternity ward. Lena was awake, sitting up slightly, her hand resting on her belly. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression suggested she'd been waiting for him. You're back, she said softly. I'm back. Victor moved to the chair beside her bed, the same position he'd occupied hours earlier. And the threat is neutralized. Volkov's leaving the city. He won't be bothering you again. Did you... She paused, seeming afraid to ask. Did you kill him? No. Victor met her eyes. I paid off his debts and gave him money to relocate. In exchange, he disappears and never comes near you again. If he breaks that agreement, then yes, I'll handle it differently. But for now, he's alive and gone. Lena stared at him, surprise evident on her face. You let him go? After everything he did? I found another solution, Victor said quietly. It cost money instead of blood, but the end result is the same. You're safe, he's gone, and I didn't have to become more of a monster than I already am. Tears welled in Lena's eyes. You actually tried. You actually found another way. I promised I would. Victor reached out, taking her hand carefully. I can't promise it'll work every time. Can't promise there won't be situations where violence is still the answer. But I'm learning, Lena. Learning that power isn't just about force, that sometimes the strongest choice is the one that doesn't involve pulling a trigger. Lena pulled his hand to her belly, pressing it against where their daughter moved beneath the surface. She's going to need you to keep learning, to keep trying. Can you do that? Victor felt the small movements beneath his palm. His daughter, alive and fighting, proof that something good could survive even in the wreckage of everything he'd done wrong. Yes, he said, and meant it. For her, I can do that. They sat in silence, both feeling the life between them, both understanding that this was just the beginning, that there would be more threats, more impossible choices, more moments where Victor would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. But for now, in this quiet hospital room with monitors tracking 2 heartbeats that meant everything, it was enough to try, enough to choose a different kind of strength, enough to start becoming the father his daughter deserved. The hospital discharged Lena after 72 hours of observation, with strict instructions for bed rest and weekly monitoring appointments. Victor had wanted to move her back to his penthouse where he could ensure round-the-clock care, but Lena had refused with a firmness that told him pushing would only set them back. Instead, they'd compromised. Lena returned to her small apartment in the neighborhood she'd built her new life in, but Victor hired a private nurse to check on her twice daily and installed a medical alert system that connected directly to his phone. He'd also, without asking permission, because some battles weren't worth fighting, upgraded her building's security and placed 2 discreet guards in a rotation that kept watch without being intrusive. Lena had noticed, of course, but she hadn't argued, which Victor took as progress. Now, 3 weeks later, Victor stood outside her apartment door with takeout from the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date 5 years ago. He texted ahead. Another compromise, another way of respecting the boundaries she'd drawn. She'd responded with a simple okay, which wasn't exactly enthusiastic, but wasn't a rejection either. She answered on the second knock, looking softer than he'd seen her in months. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater that accommodated her growing belly. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and her face had lost some of the constant tension that had defined their interaction since he'd found her at that crosswalk. "You brought Marcello's," she said, eyeing the distinctive bags in his hands. "I remembered it was your favorite." Victor stepped inside when she moved back to allow him entry. "How are you feeling?" "Enormous. Exhausted. Like I'm carrying a very active soccer player who practices at 2 in the morning." Lena led him to the small dining table by the window. "But the doctor says everything looks good. No more bleeding, blood pressure is normal, and our daughter is measuring perfectly on schedule." "That's good." Victor set the bags down and began unpacking containers. "I got the mushroom risotto you liked, and the chicken piccata, and Victor?" Lena's hand on his arm stopped him. "You can't buy your way into my life with fancy takeout and security upgrades." "I know." He met her eyes. "But I can show you I'm paying attention, that I remember what matters to you, that I'm trying." Something in her expression softened. "You are trying. I've noticed." They ate mostly in silence, the comfortable kind that came from years of knowing each other. Victor caught himself watching her, the way she ate slowly, savoring each bite, the way her hand would drift to her belly whenever she felt movement, the small smile that would cross her face when their daughter kicked. "I've been thinking about names," Lena said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "For her, our daughter." Victor's chest tightened. This felt significant, her including him in something so fundamental. "What names?" "I like Sophia. It means wisdom." Lena pushed her food around her plate. "I want her to be wise, to make better choices than we did, to know when to walk away and when to fight and when to forgive." "Sophia Leone," Victor tested it out. "It's beautiful." "Sophia Moore," Lena corrected gently. "I want her to have my name, Victor. I need her to have an identity separate from your world." It stung, but Victor forced himself to nod. "Sophia Moore. That works too." "But I was thinking," Lena continued carefully, "maybe Sophia Grace Moore Leone, so she has both of us. So she knows she comes from both worlds, even if she grows up primarily in mine." Victor set down his fork, suddenly unable to eat past the emotion tightening his throat. You'd give her my name? After everything? You're her father. Lena's voice was soft but certain. That doesn't change because we're divorced, or because I'm scared of your world. She deserves to know where she comes from. All of it. The good and the complicated. There's not much good in where I come from, Victor said quietly. There's you. Lena reached across the table, her hand covering his. You're trying to be better, trying to find different solutions. That matters, Victor, more than you probably realize. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. I met with my attorney last week. Set up a trust for Sophia, education, medical expenses, anything she needs. But it's structured so the money can't be traced back to my organization. Clean money, legitimate investments, so she never has to carry the weight of how it was earned. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Victor's grip tightened slightly. I can't change where the foundation money came from. Can't erase 15 years of building power through methods you hate. But I can make sure what reaches her is clean. That when she's old enough to ask questions about her father, at least some of the answers won't make her ashamed. Lena was quiet for a moment, studying his face. What else have you been doing these past 3 weeks? Victor had known this question would come eventually. He'd been carefully dismantling certain aspects of his operation, making changes he'd never considered before Lena walked back into his life carrying his daughter. I've been transitioning some of my business interests, he said carefully. Moving away from the parts of my organization that involve the most violence. It's slow. You can't just walk away from 15 years of power overnight without creating chaos. But I'm delegating, restructuring, finding people I trust to handle things I used to handle personally. Why? Lena's voice was soft with something that might have been hope. Because I want Sophia to have a father who's present, not one who's always looking over his shoulder or disappearing for days to handle situations that might get him killed. I want to be able to go to her school plays and piano recitals and soccer games without worrying that someone's going to use those public appearances to target me. That's going to take years, Lena said. Restructuring your entire operation, creating enough distance that you're not the active threat. I know. Victor met her eyes. Which is why I'm starting now. So that by the time Sophia's old enough to remember things, I'm not the man I was. I'm someone she can be proud of. Lena pulled her hand back, standing abruptly. She moved to the window, looking out at the street below where normal people lived normal lives. Victor watched her process, giving her space to think. I don't know if people can really change, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to believe they can. Want to believe you can become someone different. But Victor, I've seen who you are when you're threatened, what you're capable of when someone you love is in danger. And I'm terrified that all this restructuring and trying and good intentions will disappear the moment someone threatens Sophia. You're probably right. Victor stood, moving to stand beside her at the window but not touching. When someone threatens her, I'll become exactly the monster you're afraid of, because that's who I am at my core, Lena. Someone who protects what's mine with absolute ruthlessness. That's not reassuring. It's honest. Victor turned to face her. I can restructure my business. I can delegate the violence. I can create distance between myself and the worst parts of what I've built. But I can't change the fundamental fact that when it comes to you and Sophia, I will always choose your safety over morality. Always choose protection over principles. That's not something I can fix or evolve past. It's hardwired into who I am. Then how is this supposed to work? Lena's voice cracked with frustration. How do I co-parent with someone who might turn into a monster at any moment? The same way I parent with someone who might take our daughter and disappear at any moment, Victor said quietly. We trust each other. Not blindly, not naively, but with full awareness of each other's capabilities and limits. You know I'll become dangerous if Sophia's threatened. I know you'll run if you feel trapped. We work within those parameters. Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's a terrible foundation for co-parenting. It's an honest one. Victor reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and rested his hand on her belly. Sophia kicked almost immediately, as if responding to his touch. And maybe that's all we can offer her right now. Two parents who love her desperately, who are trying their best, who know each other's flaws and choose to work together anyway. Lena covered his hand with hers, and they stood like that for a long moment, connected through their daughter, separated by history and fear and all the impossible complications that had defined and destroyed their marriage. "I want you involved in her life," Lena said softly. "Not as a distant benefactor who sends money and security, as a real father, present, engaged, part of her daily existence." Victor's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that these past 3 weeks, watching you try, watching you find different solutions and restructure your life to make room for her, it's shown me something I didn't think was possible. That maybe you can be both. The powerful man who built an empire, and the father who shows up for bedtime stories and diaper changes and all the mundane, beautiful chaos of raising a child." "Lena." Victor turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you sure? Because once I'm in, I'm all in. I won't be a part-time father or someone who shows up when it's convenient. If you're offering me this, I need you to mean it." "I mean it." Her eyes were bright with tears. "But I need promises from you too, real ones, not the kind you make and then break when it's expedient." "Name them." "Promise me you'll try to find non-violent solutions first, always. That pulling a trigger or giving kill orders will be the absolute last resort, only when there's genuinely no other option." "I promise." "Promise me you'll be transparent about the dangerous parts of your life. That you won't hide things from me because you think I can't handle them. I'd rather know the truth and be prepared than be blindsided." "I promise." "And promise me," Lena's voice cracked, tears spilling over. "Promise me you'll love her enough to keep yourself alive. That you won't take stupid risks or put yourself in unnecessary danger just because you're used to being the man who handles everything personally. She needs you alive more than she needs you powerful." Victor pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other spread protectively over her belly where their daughter grew. "I promise. All of it. I'll try harder, be more careful, choose life over pride. For her. For you." Lena collapsed against him, her tears soaking into his shirt, her body shaking with the release of 3 weeks of tension and fear and desperate hope. Victor held her through it, his own eyes burning with emotion he usually kept buried. "I'm still scared," she whispered against his chest. "Scared this won't work, scared you'll revert to who you were, scared someone will come after her because of you." "I'm scared too," Victor admitted. "Terrified I'll fail her, that I'll make the wrong choice at the wrong moment and she'll pay the price for my mistakes. But Lena, I've never been more motivated to get something right than I am with this. With her. With us." "There is no us," Lena said, but without the conviction she'd had before. "We're divorced. We're co-parents, that's all." "For now," Victor agreed. "But maybe someday, when I've proven I can be the man you need, when you can trust that I've really changed, maybe then we can revisit what us means." Lena pulled back enough to look up at him, her face streaked with tears. "Don't push, Victor. Don't assume that being a good father means I'll fall back in love with you. I'm not assuming anything." He wiped her tears away with his thumb, the gesture achingly tender. "I'm just not giving up hope, because you're the only woman I've ever loved, and our daughter is the only purely good thing I've ever helped create. If there's even a chance I can have both of you in my life, I'll spend however long it takes earning it." Before Lena could respond, her phone rang. She pulled away from Victor reluctantly, checking the screen. "It's Dr. Chen. I should take this." Victor nodded, stepping back to give her privacy. He busied himself cleaning up the dinner containers while Lena spoke quietly to her doctor, but he caught enough of the conversation to understand something had changed. "Okay," Lena was saying. "Yes, I can come in tomorrow." "What time?" "All right. Thank you, doctor." She ended the call and turned to Victor, her expression complicated. "They want to do another ultrasound, just routine follow-up after the placental abruption, making sure everything's healing properly." "What time? I'll drive you." "Victor, you don't have to." "What time?" he repeated gently. Lena sighed, but there was a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. 10 a.m., but I'm perfectly capable of taking a cab." "Humor me," Victor said. "Let me be there. Let me be part of this." "Fine. 10 a.m. Lena moved to the couch, lowering herself carefully. "Will you stay for a while? I know it's getting late, but I don't really want to be alone right now. Victor felt something tight in his chest loosen. Of course. What do you want to do? Just talk. Tell me about the restructuring you're doing. I want to understand what you're changing and why. So Victor talked. He told her about delegating the violent enforcement to lieutenants he trusted, about transitioning some of his criminal enterprises into legitimate businesses, about the conversations he'd had with rivals to establish boundaries that would protect his family from retaliation. He explained the financial structures he was creating to ensure Sophia would have clean money, untraceable to his organization's darker dealings. Lena listened, asking questions that showed she was actually trying to understand rather than just waiting for him to finish. And somewhere in the middle of explaining how he was transitioning a money laundering operation into a legitimate security consulting firm, Victor realized this was what he'd been missing during their marriage. He'd never just talked to her like this, never trusted her with the details of his world. He'd kept her separate, protected, ignorant of the mechanisms that kept their lifestyle running. And in doing so, he'd made her feel like an accessory rather than a partner. That's actually brilliant, Lena said when he finished explaining a particularly complex restructuring plan. Morally questionable, but strategically brilliant. I learned from the best, Victor said. You. The way you help women disappear from abusive situations. The false identities. The financial structures that can't be traced. The underground networks. I've been applying those same principles to my business transitions. Lena's eyebrows rose. You've been studying my work? I've been trying to understand how you think, how you solve problems without violence. It's been educational. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easier than it had in years. When Lena finally yawned, Victor checked his watch and was startled to see it was past midnight. I should go, he said, standing. Let you get some rest. Wait. Lena stood too, moving slowly. Thank you. For today. For these past few weeks. For trying. You don't have to thank me for being a decent father to our daughter. I'm not thanking you for that. Lena stepped closer, close enough that Victor could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I'm thanking you for showing me that people can change, that you can change. I didn't think it was possible, but you're proving me wrong. Before Victor could respond, she rose on her toes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. It was brief, chaste, nothing like the passionate kisses they'd shared during their marriage. But it felt more significant than any of those had. Good night, Victor. Good night, Lena. Victor left before he could do something stupid like pull her into his arms and beg her to give them another chance. This was progress. Fragile, tentative progress. He wasn't going to jeopardize it by pushing too hard too fast. The next morning, Victor arrived at Lena's apartment at 9:30, allowing extra time for traffic. She was ready, dressed in a soft blue dress that accommodated her belly, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The drive to the hospital was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Lena seemed nervous, her hand constantly moving to her belly, her eyes distant. What's wrong? Victor asked as they pulled into the parking garage. Nothing, just, what if something's wrong? What if the abruption caused damage we don't know about yet? Victor reached over and took her hand. Then we handle it, together. But Lena, Dr. Chen said this was routine. If she was worried, she would have brought you in immediately, not scheduled a regular appointment. You're probably right. Lena squeezed his hand. I can't lose her, Victor. After everything we've been through, all the stress and fear and complications, I can't lose her now. You won't. Victor brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. She's strong, like her mother. She's going to be fine. Dr. Chen met them in the ultrasound room, her expression professionally neutral. Miss Moore, Mr. Leone, good to see you both. Let's take a look at how baby is doing, shall we? Lena lay back on the examination table and Victor stood beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. The ultrasound tech squeezed gel onto Lena's exposed belly and began moving the wand, the screen filling with the now familiar grainy black and white images. There's our girl, Dr. Chen said, pointing to the screen. Heartbeat is strong, 160 beats per minute, right where we want to see it. And if you look here, you can see she's moving around quite a bit. Victor stared at the screen, mesmerized. Sophia was so much bigger than in the ultrasound Lena had sent weeks ago. He could see her profile clearly now, the slope of her nose, the curve of her lips, her tiny fist pressed against her face. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's going to look like you," Lena said softly, squeezing his hand. "I can already tell." Dr. Chen moved the wand, checking different angles, taking measurements. The placenta has healed beautifully. No signs of further abruption or complications. Blood flow looks excellent. Weight is right on track for gestational age. Everything looks perfect, Ms. Moore. Lena's breath left her in a rush, tears streaming down her face. "She's okay? She's really okay?" "She's more than okay. She's thriving." Dr. Chen smiled. "Whatever you've been doing these past few weeks, the reduced stress, the bed rest, the careful monitoring, it's working. I'm actually comfortable taking you off bed rest restrictions, though I still want you taking it easy and avoiding high-stress situations." Victor felt relief so profound it made him dizzy. Sophia was safe, healthy, growing exactly as she should be. All the fear of the past weeks, all the terror that his world would destroy her before she even had a chance to be born, it hadn't come to pass. "Would you like some pictures?" the tech asked, and both Lena and Victor nodded eagerly. They left the hospital 20 minutes later with a dozen high-quality ultrasound images showing their daughter from every angle. Lena held them carefully, studying each one like they held the secrets of the universe. "I want to show these to everyone at work," she said as Victor drove, "and my friends, and maybe frame a few for the nursery." "The nursery?" Victor glanced over at her. "You're setting up a nursery?" "Well, I can't keep her in a drawer," Lena said with a laugh. "I've been looking at cribs online, trying to figure out what I can afford on my salary. Nothing fancy, but something safe and sturdy." "Let me buy it," Victor said immediately. "Let me buy all of it. The crib, the changing table, everything she needs." "Victor, this isn't about control or buying my way into your life," he interrupted gently. "This is about being her father, about providing for her. Please, Lena, let me do this." Lena was quiet for a moment. "Okay, but we pick it out together. I want her nursery to reflect both of us, not just your aesthetic or your money." "Deal." Victor smiled, feeling something settle in his chest. This was what partnership looked like. Compromise, collaboration, both of them contributing to their daughter's life. They spent the rest of the day furniture shopping, something Victor had never imagined doing but found surprisingly enjoyable. Lena had opinions about everything, from the shade of white for the crib to the softness of the blankets. Victor learned more about thread counts and safety standards than he'd ever thought possible. But watching Lena light up as she planned their daughter's space, seeing her smile genuinely for the first time in months, made every minute worth it. By the time they'd ordered everything and arranged for delivery, it was late afternoon. Victor drove Lena home, helping her carry the smaller purchases up to her apartment. "Stay for dinner," Lena said as he set down the last bag. "I'm making pasta. Nothing fancy, but there's enough for two." Victor wanted to say yes more than almost anything, but he also recognized that Lena was still fragile, still finding her footing in this new dynamic between them. Pushing too hard would only drive her away. "I'd love to," he said, "but I have a meeting at 7 that I can't reschedule. Rain check?" Lena looked surprised, then pleased. "Rain check? Maybe this weekend? I'll call you." Victor moved toward the door, then paused. "Lena, thank you. For today. For letting me be part of this." "You're her father," Lena said simply. "Of course you're part of this." Victor left before the emotion building in his chest could overflow. He made it to his car before he had to stop, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. This was what he'd wanted, what he'd been fighting for, Lena trusting him enough to include him, to build a life alongside his rather than separate from him. Their daughter healthy and growing, with two parents who were learning how to put her needs above their own pain. It wasn't perfect. They weren't back together. There were still mountains of trust to rebuild and patterns to break. But it was progress. Real, tangible progress toward something that might actually work. Victor pulled out his phone and sent a text to Marco. "Clear my schedule for the next 3 months. Only critical emergencies. Everything else gets delegated." The response came back quickly. "Everything?" "Everything," Victor confirmed. "I'm taking time to be present for my family. The organization can function without me micromanaging every detail. Understood, boss. I'll handle it." Victor started the car and headed toward his penthouse, his mind already planning. He'd been saying he wanted to change, wanted to be better, wanted to be the father Sophia deserved. Now it was time to actually do it, to step back from the day-to-day operations of his organization and focus on what actually mattered. Over the next few weeks, Victor established a new rhythm. He saw Lena 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes for doctor's appointments, sometimes to work on the nursery, sometimes just to talk. They were rebuilding friendship, trust, the foundation that had cracked under the weight of his controlling nature during their marriage. He learned her schedule, her preferences, the small details of her life he'd never paid attention to before. He learned that she liked her tea with honey, that she worked late on Tuesdays helping clients navigate court systems, that she had a standing lunch date with her best friend every Saturday. And he learned to respect those boundaries, to not show up unannounced, to ask before making decisions that affected her, to treat her like a partner rather than someone who needed his protection whether she wanted it or not. Lena, in turn, started letting him in. She'd text him updates about Sophia's movements, about funny things that happened at work, about her fears and hopes for their daughter. She'd call when she needed something heavy moved or when she wanted a second opinion on nursery colors. It wasn't the passionate, consuming relationship they'd had during their marriage. It was quieter, steadier, built on mutual respect rather than overwhelming chemistry. And somehow, it felt more real. 2 months after that ultrasound appointment, Victor was helping Lena assemble a bookshelf for the nursery when she suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "What's wrong?" Victor was on his feet immediately, every protective instinct firing. "Nothing's wrong," Lena laughed, grabbing his hand and pressing it firmly against her belly. "Wait for it." Victor felt a strong, distinct kick against his palm. Then another. Then what felt like Sophia doing acrobatics inside her mother. "She's active today," Lena said, her eyes bright. "The doctor said that's good. Means she's healthy and strong." Victor knelt in front of Lena, both hands now on her belly, feeling their daughter move and kick and announce her presence. "Sophia," he said softly, "I'm your dad. I know you can't hear me yet, but I wanted you to know I'm here. I'm going to be here. And I'm going to love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anything." Lena's hand covered his, tears streaming down her face. She knows. Somehow, I think she knows. They stayed like that for a long time, both connected to their daughter, both feeling the miracle of life that had somehow survived everything they'd put it through. "Victor," Lena said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up, concerned by her tone. "What is it?" "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we were and what we are now and what we might become." Lena took a shaky breath. "And I think maybe I'm ready to try again. Not marriage, not right away, but dating. Seeing if we can build something new instead of trying to resurrect what died." Victor's heart stopped. "Are you serious?" "I'm terrified," Lena admitted. "Terrified you'll revert to who you were. Terrified I'll fall in love with you again and you'll break my heart. But I'm also watching you change, watching you try. And I think maybe we deserve a second chance. Maybe Sophia deserves to see her parents actually happy together instead of just co-parenting from a distance." Victor stood slowly, pulling Lena up with him, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "I will spend the rest of my life earning this second chance. I promise you that." "Don't promise forever," Lena said softly. "Just promise tomorrow. Promise you'll keep trying tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. That's all I need." "I promise tomorrow," Victor whispered, and then he kissed her. It was different from their kisses during their marriage. Less desperate, less consuming, but somehow more meaningful. It tasted like second chances and hard-won trust, and the possibility of building something better from the ruins of what they'd lost. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lena rested her forehead against his chest. "This doesn't fix everything. We still have a lot to work through." "I know. And if you revert, if you start controlling or lying or making unilateral decisions, I'm gone. No second chances after the second chance." "Understood. And you have to keep restructuring, keep moving away from the violence, keep proving that you can be the man Sophia needs you to be." "I will." Victor pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Every day. For the rest of my life, if that's what it takes. Lena pulled back, searching his face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she smiled. The first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her since before the divorce. Okay then, she said. Let's see if we can make this work. We will, Victor said with absolute certainty, because we have the best possible motivation. As if on cue, Sophia kicked hard enough that both of them felt it. They laughed, the sound filling the small nursery with warmth and hope and the promise of a future neither of them had thought possible just months ago. Victor pulled Lena close, one hand on her belly where their daughter grew, and realized that for the first time in his life, he'd found something worth more than power. He'd found family. Not the kind built on fear and control and absolute dominance, but the kind built on trust and compromise, and the willingness to change for the people you love. And as he stood there in that nursery, holding the woman he'd never stopped loving while feeling their daughter move between them, Victor Leone, the man who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and control, made a choice. He chose them. Over everything. Over power. Over pride. Over the organization he'd spent 15 years building. He chose love, real love, the kind that required vulnerability and trust, and being willing to become someone better than you were. And for the first time in his life, that choice felt like winning. 3 months later, when Sophia Grace Moore Leone entered the world at exactly midnight on a Tuesday in March, Victor was there. He held Lena's hand through every contraction, whispered encouragement when she wanted to give up, and cried when he heard his daughter's first scream announcing her arrival. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of absolute perfection with dark hair like her mother, and eyes that would probably turn the same stormy gray as his. Victor held her for the first time with hands that had done terrible things, and made a silent vow that those hands would only ever be gentle with her, that she would grow up knowing her father as someone who protected through love rather than fear, who solved problems with intelligence rather than violence, who chose to be present over being powerful. Lena watched from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, as Victor cradled their daughter and whispered promises about the life they were going to build together. She's perfect, Victor said, unable to look away from Sophia's face. She is, Lena agreed, and she's ours. Both of ours. Both of ours, Victor repeated, and it felt like a vow, like a promise of partnership and shared responsibility, and all the beautiful, terrifying challenges that came with raising a child. That night, with Sophia sleeping peacefully in the hospital nursery and Lena finally resting, Victor sat in the chair beside her bed and pulled out his phone. He sent a message to Marco. Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from active leadership. You're taking over day-to-day operations. I'll consult on major decisions, but I'm done being the man who runs everything. I have more important work now. Marco's response came quickly. Congratulations, boss. She's beautiful. And don't worry, I've got this. You focus on your family. Victor turned off his phone and looked at the woman sleeping in the hospital bed, at the monitors tracking her vitals, at the small bassinet beside her where their daughter would sleep when the nurses brought her back. This was his empire now. Not criminal enterprises or territory disputes or power plays. This small, fragile, absolutely precious family he'd somehow been given a second chance to be part of. And he was going to protect it, not with violence or control or the ruthless efficiency that had defined his old life, but with presence, with love, with the daily choice to be better than he was yesterday. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments when his old instincts would scream at him to revert to what he knew. But looking at Lena sleeping peacefully, knowing their daughter was safe down the hall, feeling the unfamiliar but profound contentment of having everything that truly mattered, Victor knew he'd made the right choice. He'd traded an empire built on fear for a family built on love, and he'd won the only war that had ever really mattered, the war to become a man worthy of the trust they'd placed in him, the war to be present instead of powerful, the war to choose love without cages, protection without control, and presence without possession. He'd won. They'd all won. And as the sun rose on his first full day as Sophia's father, Victor Leone, former kingpin, reformed monster, devoted father, smiled. Because this was what victory actually felt like.